Counselors, are you ready? It is 7:05. Good evening, everyone.
This is about smart meters. It's Zoe Galloway.
Never mind. I would now like to call the March 4th, 2025 Longmont City Council regular session to order. The live stream of this meeting can be viewed at the city's YouTube channel. It can also be viewed at longmontpublicmedia.org/watch or on Comcast channels 8 and 880. May I have the roll call, please, Crystal?
Mayor Peck,
Present.
Councilmember Christ,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Hidalgo Faring,
Here.
Councilmember McCoy,
Present.
Councilmember Popkin,
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Here.
Councilmember Yarbrough.
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I realize that they may not have voted for it.
As a reminder to the public, in accordance with the council's rules of procedure, the rules for providing public comment are as follows. Only Longmont residents and employees of the city of Longmont may speak during first call public invited to be heard, and you must provide your address and name on the sign-up sheet before the meeting. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Anyone may speak on second reading or public hearing item, and you're asked to add your name to the speaker list for the specific item before the meeting. And anyone can speak at final call public invited to be heard. Members of the audience shall refrain from disruptive, vulgar, or abusive language, applause, heckling, or other actions that interfere with the orderly function of the council. May I have a motion to approve the February 11th meeting?
I move the
Minutes.
February 11th meeting as presented.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilor McCoy, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Hidalgo Faring. Are there any discussions or comments about the minutes? Seeing none, let's vote. And those passed unanimously. Are there any agenda revisions, Crystal?
No, ma'am.
Okay. There is an item, it's 12B, but it was added to the agenda late yesterday afternoon, so anyone who looked at the agenda before late yesterday afternoon, that item is now on the agenda. Are there motions from council for future agenda items? Councilor Christ?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually have 2 or 3 things on my mind this evening. And pardon me while I get to my memory jogger here. Okay, so actually I'm looking at the financials that our excellent accounting staff provided us. And I just, I want to recognize, first of all, that the Recreation, Golf, Library, and Culture was spent less money in 2024 than in 23. But moving on from that, I'm looking at the public safety expenses, and they're about 41 million, 42 million. And above that, if you look at the revenues, we had about 40. So that tells me why we struggle with the public safety fund. And this is all in a way of saying that we need to raise more sales taxes.
Excuse
And
me,
I
point of
would
order.
like to put on the,
You're making a motion?
I am, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I would move to put on a future agenda.
Okay.
And possibly, city manager, I'm thinking of a study session to find ways that we can benefit businesses in our city so that we can raise more sales tax. In addition to that, the ARPA funds are on our agenda tonight, and I would also look at maybe coming up with some kind of coalition of organizations that can help business succeed and have them put forth some ideas. So that's one.
So
Yeah.
that was one motion?
Yeah, I have a
Can
couple
we
things
go-
on my mind.
But let's take it one motion at a time.
I am, okay, so let's go with that motion and see what the council thinks about that.
Okay, let's,
Concise it
can you say that once more time, what that motion is?
and concise.
I move that we set for a future study session an organization of 2 or 3 entities in Longmont that can find ways to raise our sales tax in the city by supporting small business.
Point of
Okay.
clarification.
Councilor Rodriguez?
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I think you may just friendly, may want to reword that in the sense of finding additional business to promote revenue, not increasing the sales tax.
I'm sorry if it came off as increasing sales tax, but increasing revenue from sales tax within the city, which just means more sales for businesses.
So that's you corrected.
Can you turn on your microphone, please?
So you corrected it to increase revenue.
Yes, increase sales tax revenue.
Oh, I'll support that. Second it.
It's been moved by Councilor Chris to move to direct staff to hold a study session item on ways to increase revenue through sales tax. Councilor Popkin.
Yeah, I guess another point of clarification here. So is the goal to support businesses here, or is the goal to increase revenue from the sales tax? I know one does support the other, but is your intention of the study session to actually look at ways to support businesses, or is it to look at opportunities to generate additional sales tax revenue? So I see those as two different purposes that would inform how staff and potentially council would approach the actual study session that I think you envision.
I would like to support business activity with the goal of potentially raising sales tax revenue.
Noted. Thank you for that clarification.
Is there any more? Oh, Councilor Mayor Pro Tem Hidalgo Ferry.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, what would be the intended outcome? I know that generating revenue from sales tax, supporting small business, I guess I'm trying to envision what this study session would discuss. Are we looking to find an organization? Are we going to be discussing? Do you have an organization in mind? Is this, I have a lot of unanswered questions or unclarity about what would be the intended outcome of this study session and what would be the information presented to us at this study session.
So last year in May, we discussed the ARPA funding, which was originally there was some money earmarked to help facilitate the recovery for small business. And it jogged my memory when the ARPA funding came through on our agenda this evening. So I see one of the problems with that funding is that we don't have a plan to use it. And if we had like a solid plan that would potentially help businesses return to their prior thriving economic environment, that would benefit everybody. And I see that there are several organizations in town that do support and work with small business, and I would like to hear their ideas to achieve that goal.
Seeing no one else, I'll ask a question. So you are now tying it to the ARPA funds?
Not necessarily.
No?
Well, it was earmarked at one time, and I think we probably will still have that money available, but rather than just say, here's some money, I would like to say, here's a plan. Now, what do you think we would need to enact that plan?
So here, Teresa Malloy, our CFO, is going to talk to us about how those dollars are used. I think.
We'll find out. Hey, what kind of Twinkies?
Harold Dominguez, City Manager.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was actually looking for Sandy. So I know in terms of when we had CARES funding, and I'm not sure if ARPA fit into this, one of the challenges, we did have some programs where we had the tokens that we were giving out where people could go to businesses. One of the issues that we ran into with the business assistance program, and I think Scott's here. Where's Scott?
Yeah, he was.
can help me remember this. I think one of the challenges we ran into that arena, and this is what we'll have to look at, is we had a duplication of benefits issue. And so that if they went through the loan program that was in existence during that time frame, I know that was one of the problems we ran into with the money that we had earmarked. And I know it was with CARES, I just can't remember if it was with ARPA or what was in there, but there was a component in that conversation that became difficult for the businesses to move through because of some of the other components in that. And that's what, I mean, in terms of that piece, we'll have to look at that. I don't know that, I think I'm still struggling with what we're trying to figure out in the sense of, so I think I would appreciate some more clarity in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. Because generally, are we looking at how do we incentivize more retail or attract more retail to generate more revenue? That is this type of conversation. If we're talking about how do we promote businesses to generate more revenue, that's a nuance, that's a different conversation. So I think if I can get a sense of specifically what we're trying to get at, that would help.
You
let me
know,
call on-
maybe it, oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Maybe rather than a study session, it would make more sense to have some special presentation so we could have more direction into which way we could go with this. Go ahead, Councilor.
Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. Just to add on a little bit to what the city manager has said. So I'm trying to grasp, is this to set up a task force, if you will? And if so, is that how to change things from a regulatory standpoint at the city level, which is what we do, versus I don't know on the other side of it, as far as the kind of recommendations that would be made from the business standpoint that does not involve city regulation. I'm not quite sure also exactly. I also do want to point out that the whole point of, to me, this motion, and this is not being critical, the point of the motion is to actually have something on the agenda where we probably do discuss this in more detail and not so much hashing everything out tonight. And so I think that's also part of the process that we're looking at here. So I wanted to put those questions out as well as also clarifying that we're not asking for all the answers from council members and staff tonight. So thank you.
Correct.
And one more, Matthew, Councilor Popkin, and then I think we should vote.
Well, Scott is in the chamber now, if
Yeah.
you want to talk to him.
Yeah, thanks. Councilmember Chris, I think I support the intent of what you're trying to do, and I might suggest that for the sake of the benefit of the public and us and staff time, that we maybe refine that ask for a future meeting, somewhat in the lines of what Councilmember Rodriguez was suggesting, then come back and propose something more specific. Because right now it feels very open-ended, and so I'm not even sure what I'd expect to get out of that. And so for that reason, I won't be supporting this motion, but I'd suggest you just refine it in the kind of behind the scenes, and then we can take it forward together even at that point.
And I would
Thanks.
suggest if you, to speak to our Chamber of Commerce first and get ideas from them to refine what your ask is in line with what they do on a daily basis. Does that sound a little okay?
Yeah. Do you think we should ask now?
No, it's not the time to do that. We would do it when it comes back as a motion to go forward.
Okay, well, let's vote on the motion now, or we could table it.
What do you want to do? It's your motion.
Well, thank you. I think I will withdraw it and bring it back.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, I would support that, and I think it's a good idea, and I'm sure Scott would be more than willing to work with you. I just volunteered you, Scott.
And we waited until you were out of the room to do that,
City Manager.
Mayor, if I may, the duplication of benefits issue actually was on the CARES funding. On the ARPA funding for the business assistance, I think that was utilized for the parklets around Main Street, because what we found is businesses in other locations could expand outward when they had when you could open outside. The Main Street businesses had more challenges because of space, and so there was funding utilized on that. Since this discussion is being put forward, one of the things we were thinking about from a staff level is maybe potentially needing a new retail study
Okay.
to understand what, where we're positioned, what that means, what we can look for. Specifically looking at, and I think this may be what was embedded in this, is specifically looking at areas in our community where there are more challenges in terms of retail. Think of 17th and Pace, think of 17th and Hover, and identifying areas and different strategies. So that's what we were kind of thinking about. But if that is not what this is about, tell me now, please. Or tell me when we come back, when this motion comes back again in the future. That I would really appreciate that.
Okay, thank you for that input, and I think that it would be a better motion if you brought in City Manager and Scott and really refined it. All right, thank you for that discussion. Are there any other agenda items? Okay, I see nothing. Moving on.
Wait, I have one more.
Oh, sorry.
Just to slow in my button. Okay, so this has come to me actually from the business community. And once again, looking at my general fund expenditures chart provided by accounting. If you look to the very left and you see the expenses for mayor and city council, it's very low and more like the utilities. And what the business community said to me is, we really need to be paying a more professional wage to our counselors and to our mayor. And so I don't know in this discussion if this is a time to bring this back on an agenda item, but I would like to have this discussion maybe further in our pre-session. And I don't know if I need to ask to do that or add it to the agenda there, but I would like to discuss the ideas the business community has for us in that regard.
So which would you prefer, bringing it back as a council agenda or a,
I think I would like to discuss it at our next pre-session,
okay,
which is next week, the week after next, and then we could discuss a way forward with it.
the week after next, I think, what date are we looking at?
I think it's
Next
the
week is
18th.
this meeting.
I think
Right.
it's
And then the
18th.
next one is 5 of us, the mayor and Councilmember Yarbrough.
Oh, in Japan.
And yes, and there will not be no pre-session, I'll be in Japan.
Okay, so no pre-session at all.
Should we go to April?
Well, let's see. The 25th, do we have a pre-session on the 25th? I don't think we do.
I don't know.
And I think
It's not scheduled.
we start in April with a study session.
So do you want to just say in April?
Yeah, let's do it in April.
Okay, great. We don't need a motion for that at all.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Oh, did you want to say something?
Well, I did want to ask a clarifying question.
Okay, do.
And thank you, Mayor Peck. My clarifying question is that we technically did just pass a raise to the council members. And so was the business community thinking that it would be appropriate to ask for something on top of that?
Many of the business community felt that it was not useful.
The raise that was recently passed?
Yes, that in looking at the numbers, we should be getting more of a professional wage. And I just want to throw that out there. And I think there's a way to reconstruct things a bit to where it's fair and it doesn't really hit the budget in a bad way. I mean, we look at the city attorney's office and the court office next to us. And I'm not saying it's who's doing better, but we are more of in line with the utilities.
Right.
Rather than a professional, position.
Have this discussion at the pre-session.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I'm going to honestly love to hear that point of view because generally, anytime this is brought up, it's completely negative towards us. So I'll be really happy to hear that.
Okay. To be continued.
Why don't you invite those businesses to our pre-session? Okay, moving on, city manager's report.
Report, Mayor, Council.
Thank you. We don't have any special reports or presentations that I can see. We are now at the consent agenda and introduction and reading by title of the first reading ordinances. So, Crystal, would you mind reading those?
Oh, do we need public, public
Oh, I-
invited to be heard?
We do, oh my goodness. I'm sorry. We are now at public invited to be heard, first call. Remember that we need your name and address, and the first one on the list is Matt Eldred.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, Mayor Peck and council members. My name is Matt Eldred. I live at 318 Carter Lane here in Longmont. I'm also the CEO of TLC Learning Center, 69-year-old nonprofit early childhood program here in Longmont. And I'm here tonight to ask you to consider an upcoming first reading for a public-private partnership with the City of Longmont and a TLC Learning Center early learning collaborative project. You'll be getting that in your packet here before the end of the month. I just wanted to thank you for looking at that ahead of time. And also, this would be an opportunity for us to be able to save some money on this project. To date, we've spent about $417,000 in permitting and security fees for the project. Really excited to tell you that we've broken ground in December on this project at 3rd and Ken Pratt. The TLC Early Learning Collaborative Project will include affordable childcare, mental health services, family resources, a community gathering space for trainings and other community resources, college courses, early childhood education for our workforce and our community. It's really exciting that this project is happening. We've already broken ground, and to date, we've also, to give you a little bit more background on why this is a public-private partnership, we've hauled off about 13,000 cubic yards of dirt from this site to the True North site, which will be the housing project behind Costco. It's 2 left turns from the project and has saved both projects over $250,000 already just to be able to do that. So these collaborative partnerships are already in place, and I'm really excited. Finally, I'm really excited to be able to entertain the opportunity to work with the City of Longmont. I think there's really a private and a model for employer-based childcare where the City of Longmont may be able to subsidize city employees' childcare, especially for those city employees who have young children. So it's really an exciting opportunity, and I'm excited for you to see the first reading coming up. And thank you again for your consideration and for all you do for these public-private opportunities in Longmont. Thank you.
Scott Gillies?
Scott Gillis, live at 2451
Oh, sorry.
Allard Circle. Been a resident here for 25 years, and I am a small business owner. What I want to talk about a little bit is the headlines I saw Saturday morning with the resignation of Aaron Fosnick with LEDP. I am an investor in that group, and I was shocked to read what I read. I don't want to rehash everything that was in there, but I do kind of want to bring up some of the bullet points that I did see. It was very disappointing and very disturbing to me. But some of the bullet points that I saw in there is the collaboration, the lack of collaboration, teamwork, transparency, shared success. It just seemed like the city wasn't embracing what they were doing over there. Some of the other things that was the attitude from the city officials, constantly being undermined, lack of respect and uncertainty. I took this right out of the article, so I'm not saying anything that all I know is what I saw in the article. Just want to be clear on that. Those things are all kind of disturbing to me to see that this is the kind of thing that one of our leaders in this city around the businesses, more of the non-retail type businesses, is running into. I kind of want to go into now the just more disturbing part of it is what the business community kind of, and this is coming out of the article again, that the city is just, and the city leaders and city council are just not business friendly. Again, I am a business owner here. I've not experienced that necessarily, but to see that in there was very disturbing. And the three examples that she used in there, I guess, were three different businesses that used to be investors that are no longer interested in being investors again and really don't want to have anything to do with the city again. So my question is why? Why is this happening? I want to share, one of the comments is, where are these comments coming from? Why is this happening? In summation, I just want to make a couple points, a couple comments. It all seems to be pointing towards the city council and city leadership. And this is my first time to be here. This is
Welcome.
new for me. So to be second up is kind of scary. But my gut is this is not going to go away, and it shouldn't go away. My biggest concern is, what is this going to do?
I'm sorry,
Okay,
but thank you.
all right.
Jeslyn Jobs?
Hello.
Jeslyn, can you pull the
yes, do I
microphone
just-
down?
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, this is my first time in a city council meeting.
You're good.
Okay. My name is Jesslyn Jobs, and I live at 2160 Winding Drive here in Longmont, and I have been a resident here in Longmont for 4 years now. And I came to the city council meeting tonight to advocate on behalf of our children here in Longmont, and I wanted to do this because children cannot advocate for themselves. They rely on us as adults to advocate for them. And there's an issue that's come up within our community that I believe we need to advocate on their behalf for. And so I have come today to request the City Council to consider creating or amending ordinances to work on behalf of our children for their safety. The first one is to create proximity guidelines for registered sex offenders to, as proximity to schools and parks where children are frequenting. And the second is to limit the number of registered sexual offenders that are able to live at one address here in Longmont. And the reason I've come here today, we have a situation that has arisen in the neighborhood that I reside in, where we do have 5 registered offenders living at one address. We are next to a park. We're also next to an elementary school. And as a mother and as a member of this community, it has me concerned. 4 of the 5 offenders have offenses against children. 1 has multiple offenses from multiple states over a multiple year span. And 3 of the offenders have recent convictions. And while we hope that they are receiving the treatment and the resources and the support that they need in order to move forward on their journey towards recovery and towards creating a new life and hopefully not reoffending, we also want to make sure that the children here in Longmont and in our neighborhood are safe. And I'm going to quote something from Cohen et al. In 2010, which was published in the Psychiatric Practice. Sexual offenders have a high rate of reoffense, and pedophilia is difficult to treat and relapse is a continual problem. And these statistics have me concerned due to the proximity and due to the number of offenders at one address. And so I'd like to ask the council to consider how we can keep our children safe and what we can do to address our ordinances to keep children safe. And I believe that creating these or amending these ordinances will both increase safety for our children. It will increase the likelihood for families to want to move to Longmont and to stay in Longmont. I know for me as a newer resident within the past 4 years, this impacts my desire to stay long-term in Longmont. And so I do think that this would help Longmont grow and bring in new families if we can show and demonstrate that we keep our children safe and provide safe spaces for our children to go to school and to go to the park. And so I understand that this is on your agenda to meeting tonight, and I appreciate that, and I do look forward to hearing what you share about that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessalyn. Shona Crampton?
I'm going to take my name off. Jessalyn covered everything that I wanted to cover, so
Oh,
I
okay.
could read her notes again, but hopefully it was well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary Hodges?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Gary Hodges, 2148 Stewart Street. So, some weeks ago, I met with one of the candidates for the recent council appointment to chat about topics related to the city. And a question during that conversation was raised, and it was, why can't we just use less energy? So, I have a plot here. So I saw this graphic recently and it made me think of that discussion. So, we can look at it. So the x-axis is global or GDP per capita. The left axis is energy consumed per capita. So you see the blue circles are countries. They're generally considered wealthy, and the orange or yellow are generally considered more poor or poverty countries. And so what we have there in the big open areas, there's no such thing as a low energy rich country. So why can't we just use less energy? Well, it's because you can't just take one of those rich countries straight down the graph into the low energy. They're going to move along that relationship. So it's not hard to imagine that this relationship extends to states and counties and cities as well. So let's see. One thing I noticed today, the Dominican Republic and Haiti are both on that plot. And if you notice, Dominican Republic is up in the wealthy area and Haiti's in the poor area. So this is two countries that share the same island in the Caribbean. So we have the same ethnicity, same geography, same weather, same location. Is the difference in wealth from political actions and policy? I don't know, but the real takeaway from this plot is plentiful energy is wealth and lack of energy is poverty. So I heard at the recent council retreat that there was a question posed if Longmont could attract larger businesses with high energy demands. My understanding is Longmont Power said the answer is no, they can't just crank up the power right now to support something like that. And so the question I have is, are we going to choose wealth or are we going to choose poverty for our city? So here's another plot. So beginning in 2000, a concerted global effort began to supplant hydrocarbon electricity production with wind and solar. So if you notice, so that's around 2000, coal, oil, natural gas, everything ramped up, everything increased. And up to $10 trillion later, what we have are these little slivers at the top of the plot. So if you add those two together, that's 5.6% for wind and solar. But because of some statistical stuff going on there, the real number is actually about 3%. So the bottom line is traditional biomass, that's things like wood and dung. And that's today is 3 to 4 times what wind and solar provides. And so the takeaway from here is that the world only adds to the energy portfolio. We do not substitute. There is no energy transition occurring. That is self-evident proof, and anyone suggesting that there is, or that suggesting that is really full of wind turbines and solar panels. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Ryan Forbes.
Ryan Forbes, 2220 Watersong Circle. And first on the council pay, I firmly support that for a couple of reasons. One, I know I'm on the board of a nonprofit, and one of the big issues is public service is seen as something you're supposed to volunteer to do. But if you're in a business, it's seen as you need to have high salaries to attract good talent, which should be for any position, no matter what it is. High salaries are going to attract more people regardless. And I'd hope the same way for city council. The other thing is if you've ever read the book, The Path to Power, which I highly recommend to anyone in Texas, the local people working for the state didn't care about salary because the lobbyists were bribing them. So that's another reason for high pay. The other reason I wanted to come out tonight is because I was born and raised Jewish, and I've seen a lot of anti-Semitic actions throughout my life. And one of the big reasons is growing up, people who were committing the actions didn't know the difference between the country of Israel's flag and Jewish people. And now that's kind of changed by people who know the difference between Jewish people and the country of Israel are protesting the actions of the country of Israel and know that they're not protesting the Jewish people doing actions against the Jewish flag. And I'm not saying whether their actions are right or wrong, illicit or not, but their actions are not anti-Semitic. And I have heard in this chamber that word getting tossed around a lot, and outside the chamber as well. And I want to be clear, as a Jewish person, they're not. That's not something going towards Jews, that's something going towards a country doing their specific actions. So, thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Altschuler.
Steve Altschuler, 1555 Taylor Drive. Just this past weekend, I was having lunch with a friend, and we were talking about business in Longmont. And one of my points was, we don't have to make Longmont grow bigger and pack in more and more people. There are still ways that you can make the businesses in Longmont more prosperous. We didn't come to a solution, but we were roughly talking about ways to attract more residents to spend more of the money that they have in Longmont. And if you end up with some sort of a panel, I would love to volunteer my services to be on that and offer suggestions. And as one of you did bring up, the right person to talk to is Scott Cook from the Chamber of Commerce. When I was running for city council before, I mentioned that there should be some, I know you guys are real busy, and the more involved I get, the more I find out how busy you guys are. More and more meetings and more things you have to read and more things you have to study up on. There should be somebody from city council at every after hours that happens once a month for the Chamber of Commerce. There's also a couple times a week where they have new business openings, little meet and greets. You guys should be very involved with the businesses in Longmont, the owners of the businesses, talk to them, find out what their needs are, find out what their problems are. Small business runs our country, it runs our state, it runs our city. And if you're not getting the pulse of small businesses, then you can never have the right answers for what to do with Longmont. Just doing more building and packing more people in here doesn't matter. We've already talked before, and like 50% of the people in Longmont go to Erie and Boulder and Firestone to work. So if there's ways to talk to these businesses and get them to hire more people, and maybe get a coupon book where you encourage more residents to shop in Longmont. And I'm not talking about one day a year where you have Shop Longmont, you know, but there could be, I don't know. It is worth a conversation. The whole conversation with me started when I said, I'm glad that Costco is here. I used to have to go to Superior or Thornton to go shopping. And now, even if I'm driving past those stores, I say, no, I'm going to wait till I get to Longmont and use my dollars in Longmont. So we need to promote that to the public and get more sales happening here and create more revenue without changing the tax rate, which I think is where you were going. I had other stuff I was going to say, but I'm down to 10 seconds. So have a wonderful evening, and I'd be glad to volunteer myself for a board of conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So there's no one on the list here that is from Longmont, so I'm going to close first call public invited to be heard. Moving on, we are now at the consent agenda. Crystal, would you mind reading the ordinances on the consent agenda into the record?
Yes, Mayor. The second reading and public hearing on for all ordinances introduced on this consent agenda will be held on March 25th, 2025. Item 9B is ordinance 2025-22, a bill for an ordinance making additional appropriations for expenses and liabilities of the City of Longmont for the fiscal year beginning January 1, 2025. Item 9C is Resolution 2025-14, a resolution of the Longmont City Council reversing the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission's denial of the Quick Trip Conditional Use Site Plan and 3 modification requests. And item 9B is approved council member virtual participation for 2 future meeting dates.
Councilor McCoy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to remove 9C. If there's no others that are going to remove them, anything else? I'll move the consent agenda minus 9C.
Okay, Councilor McCoy moved to approve the consent agenda minus item 9C. Do I have a second? Second. And that it's been seconded by Councilor Popkin. We are now on, yes, let's vote. What did that, can you bring it back? So I think that passed unanimously. Okay, thank you. My screen disappeared. So we're now on ordinance on second reading. The first one is A1, 2025-11, a bill for an ordinance amending sections 3.04.885 of the Longmont Municipal Code, adopting amendments to the City of Longmont General Employees Retirement Plan. We have our CFO here to explain.
Mayor and Council, I'll just make a quick comment. Teresa Malloy, Chief Financial Officer. So we did provide in your packet this evening some additional information. We asked our outside counsel those questions that you posed to us last time and provided that information back to you all. Not planning on a presentation or going over that information.
Okay.
Just wanted to let you know that it is there and we're available to try and answer questions if you have them.
Okay, are there any questions from council on this ordinance or this bill? It looks like we're good. I will now open the public hearing for 2025-11. Is there anyone that would like to comment or ask questions about this bill? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I move item A1, 2025-11.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilor McCoy, seconded by Councilor Popkin. Let's vote. And that passes unanimously. The next one is A2, 2025-12. This is a bill for an ordinance amending section 3.04.885 of the Longmont Municipal Code, adopting amendments to the money accumulation pension plan, for employees of the City of Longmont. Are there any questions or comments from councilors? Seeing none, I'll now open the public hearing on 2025-12. Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment on this bill? Seeing no one, I will now close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I'll move ordinance 2025-12.
Second.
It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Hidalgo Faring, seconded by Councilor Christ. Let's vote. And that carries unanimously. The next one is 2025-13. It's a bill for an ordinance amending section 3.04.885 of the Longmont Municipal Code, adopting an amendment to the City of Longmont's Police Pension Plan and Trust Agreement. Are there any questions or comments from council? Seeing none, I will now open the public hearing on 2025-13. Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment or question this bill? Seeing no one, I'll now close the public hearing on 2025-13 and ask for a motion.
I'll move ordinance 2025-13.
Second.
It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Hidalgo Faring, seconded by Councilor Crest. Let's vote. And that passes unanimously. The next one is 2025-14. It's a bill for an ordinance amending Section 3.04.885 of the Longmont Municipal Code, adopting amendments to the City of Longmont Fire Employees Pension Plan and Trust Agreement. Are there any questions from councilors or comments? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing on this bill, 2025-14. Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment on this bill? Seeing no one, I will now close the public comment and ask for a motion.
I move O 2025-14.
It's been moved by Councilor Chris, seconded by Councilor McCoy. Let's vote. And that carries unanimously. Now that brings us to items that have been removed from the consent agenda. Councilor McCoy, you pulled the item. It's okay.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. I actually am happy to just move this forward, but afterwards I'd like to make two motions around the concept of gas stations in Longmont. So I move the consent agenda item 9C, R 2025-14.
Point of personal privilege. Yeah, thank you. Just a point of personal privilege. Again, this is related to a quasi-judicial action that I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission for at the time, so I will be recusing myself while you decide how you want to vote or discuss this resolution. I look forward to seeing you in a few minutes or maybe sooner.
Don't go far.
Councilor McCoy.
No,
We'll wait for him to
Yeah, let's just wait for him and
leave the room.
Oh, second, if nobody's seconded yet.
thank you.
Oh, thank you, Councilor Rodriguez, for seconding that motion.
I'm just waiting for us to vote and then.
Oh, okay. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, let's vote. And that carries unanimously. Councilor McCoy.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, this is in front. First, I'd like to suggest that two motions. First, I'd like to suggest that all future gas station applications be sent to the Sustainability Advisory Board in keeping with our climate action goals, so that we have them give us some input in regards to the appropriateness of gas stations at this time. Other communities are looking at their climate action goals and considering other options.
I like your motion. Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Peck.
We should actually have a second before we discuss this.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
I'll second it.
Okay, Councilor McCoy made the motion that we have all applications for gas stations, fuel stations, go to the Sustainability Committee for their input on it before we move forward. And that was seconded by Councilor Rodriguez. Now I'd like to open it for discussion.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. So my question is, regardless of what the Sustainability Advisory Board has to say about it, we're still beholden to our development standards and codes. And so I think that a more appropriate possible motion would be to amend the code versus just sending things to the Sustainability Advisory Board.
Well, that was kind of my second.
Okay, well, it's maybe seemed a little out of order then, but that's just my, my understanding of how process should work, and so I don't like I said, I wouldn't understand the point of sending it to sustainability if we didn't first change our code.
Well, my second proposal was that we ask the Sustainability Advisory Board for recommendations on language around an ordinance regarding the limiting of any new gas stations that would be allowed to be built in the Longmont planning area, in keeping with our climate action goals.
Okay. Councillor Popkin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. Councilmember Coy, I appreciate the intent of this motion. And I think I'm a little confused as to what the objective here is of what you're proposing, because any new development has an impact on our environment. Any new development has impact on air quality, or could have an impact on air quality or emissions. Limiting future gas stations, if that is the intent here, or the objective, doesn't change the fact that we will have internal combustion engine-based vehicles who will be using that fuel. They will just be buying it from existing gas stations or gas stations out of the city if for some reason the city eliminated all gas stations. And so I guess I'm trying to understand what we're actually trying to achieve with this. We have to Councilmember Rodriguez's point before, we have a planning and zoning commission and development standards to guide any new development here. And as we heard a couple weeks ago, there's a update to our code on energy issues generally coming forward on new development design standards. And so I guess I would want to make sure that your goal here is actually represented by what you're proposing. So could you, I guess my first question to you would be, can you clarify what you're actually trying to achieve with this motion?
I thought he was on.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the questions there. The thing is that there are other communities in the Boulder County area that are actually limiting any new gas stations being built in their communities, and the reason being is that they're trying to move us from our focus on gasoline-propelled vehicles to electric vehicles. We have businesses that are coming into our community, like the In-N-Out Burger, that has charging stations, and there'll be others that actually have those as well throughout the community. And so if we're going to try to stay with some of our climate action goals and keep with the general goals of Boulder County and their climate action goals and others in the surrounding vicinity, you know, every little bit counts, and I just think that it's a healthy thing for us to look at. And it's not anything other than having this board do some of the legwork for us around the language and around the benefits of not continuing to have one gas station after another gas station on every corner. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I heard two things. One, there's the sustainability goal, and then two, there's almost the planning and mix of uses aspect of kind of development pattern. And those feel like very different issues to me. If we're trying to manage for a diversity of different development, I think that would be an appropriate thing to look at in terms of how, I'm trying to think about the land development code here, which parts of the code support different mixes of uses, and what's, if there are specific restrictions or limitations at a certain point or saturation point in the market. If your goal is on the sustainability piece of that, I'm not convinced that limiting competition for gas stations is inherently going to achieve that. And I think the real thing that's going to shift consumer behavior, resident behavior, or the two main things that I think will drive, pardon the pun, consumer behavior here is the accessibility and affordability of electric vehicles and EV charging, as well as the rate structure that our utility has to incentivize that if that's the goal we want to work through. So I might suggest looking at that mechanism or those mechanisms if that was your goal, which in intention would be to support that. I'm not sure looking at the development patterns regarding gas stations is the way to get at that. So again, if you are trying to support electric vehicles, which I do, I would want to think about what's the actual mechanism to get there. If the goal is to support a more, make sure that there's a balanced mix of uses in different zones that we have, I would suggest that we look at the land development code and kind of the limitations or lack thereof that we have in Vision Longmont. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. So I don't see the use of sending every single gas station application to the Sustainability Advisory Board, but asking them on like a one-time basis to come up with a preferred position on gas stations would seem okay, but sending every application to the Sustainability Advisory Board does not seem prudent, because I'd assume they'd say the same thing about almost all of them. They do one, they're all going to be the same after that. And that just seems likely what would happen there. That's why I was saying it's probably more prudent for us to have a conversation about code versus the Sustainability Advisory Board. And so that I just wanted to clarify my position on that specific item of your motion. So thank you.
And if you're amicable to it, I would change my amendment, my proposal to exactly that, the second part where we actually do have them come with some language and look at the different aspects of changing any sort of ordinance regarding either the limitation of gas stations or the approval of future gas stations.
I technically didn't make an amendment, so you
No.
can do what you'd like.
So, do
Well,
you,
I mean-
you want to change your
I
motion?
would change it to that. I just want to make sure that, since you were the second, there, that's why I'm,
Whatever you want to do.
okay, that's my change.
So let me see if I can reiterate that. You want to change your motion to have the Sustainability Board,
Advisory board, yeah.
Advisory Board, make a statement or recommendation to both Planning and Zoning and perhaps to Council about their position on the continued Development?
Development or appropriateness of future gas stations.
within our city.
Yep.
Okay, got there?
That makes sense? Clear as mud?
Okay. So the active, it disappeared again.
Okay,
Oh,
buddy.
do you have your light on? No, okay. So, the active motion is to send to the Sustainability Committee to inform council and Planning and Zoning, I guess, on the continued development of future gas stations. Got it? Okay. So that was moved by Councilor McCoy. Are you still going to second that motion, Councilor Rodriguez? Okay, let's vote. And that passes 6-1 with Councilor Popkin in opposition. Thank you. We're now at general business. Is everybody up okay? We need a bio break? We're good.
I wanted to make sure that Councilor McCoy was done, because he said he had two. No, that was
I think it
He
kind of
did, he-
pushed it into one, yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Rodriguez. Now we're at general business, where the first one is A, accept the Transportation Mobility Plan as the new transportation guidance for the city. And we have with us Mr. Greenwald.
Good evening,
Phil
Mayor,
Greenwald.
members of council.
Yeah, Mr. Ride-Long.
Phil Greenwald, I'm actually a transportation planning manager with the city of Longmont.
Yes.
But had a lot of fun putting Ride Longmont together with a number of folks on this council. So we'll talk a lot about that later on tonight. Just wanted to get into some of the different things that we're working on. I'm also here with Carly Seif. She's from Fair and Piers, and she's our project manager on this project. So she and I have been working, 16 months on this
Wow.
together. So we're very excited about bringing that to you tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carly. And just a quick, just kind of a general starting point is that this is really just an overview. of our transportation. We've really taken what you've told us as the city council policymakers and what the citizens have told us when we've gone out to the different public events, and taken that and put it into some of these guidelines, the framework really for transportation that we've heard over the last couple months and actually a couple years. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carly and we'll get going on.
Great, thank you, Phil. Again, Carly Seif with Ferry & Pierce, Project Manager on the Transportation Mobility Plan. So our presentation today will talk about the overall plan process, what we've been doing over the last 16 months, and then a summary of the recommendations, and then a little bit about next steps following acceptance of this plan. So the project started with an existing conditions assessment, which was an extensive and comprehensive data analysis looking at walking, biking, transit, and driving, and complementing that with community input to understand perception of travel, challenges, and issues moving on all modes in order to understand both the quantitative and the qualitative side of the state of Longmont and transportation in Longmont today. That set us up well for phase 2, which was developing and identifying recommendations and prioritizing those recommendations for all modes and bringing that to the community to make sure we heard them right during phase 1 and to hone those recommendations. We then developed a draft plan, which was available for public review for a month and then presented to Transportation Advisory Board, and then here we are, Council. The comprehensive community engagement process was throughout the plan, but really had 2 primary phases, existing conditions and then draft recommendations. Through both of those phases, we achieved 1,350 touch points from the community. We did this through a multi-pronged approach. We had an open house, 2 open houses, where we had a broad cross-section of the community come, interact with our boards, put dots on the boards and maps, vote and be able to participate and have dialogue with the consultant team and with staff. We had a steering committee of various stakeholders ranging from RTD, neighboring jurisdictions, Boulder County, school district, and commuting solutions, many others who are involved technically in adjacent and relevant fields to provide their input there. We had an online presence that was strong, and that really got the broadest number of touch points. We had people drop pins on a map to create heat maps to really show where the issues were spatially, to be able to reach people who aren't available to attend that traditional open house event. We went to where community members are, whether that be Bike to Work Day, farmers market. We went to focus groups ranging from ECAT to the Economic Development Forum and Conference. So really went to a broad, different set of events to be able to make sure we were hearing from everybody through this process. The report itself is available in 2 forms. We have an interactive online map, which is kind of an executive summary of the material. We did it in this format because we have a lot of maps. We really wanted the community and you all to be able to interact and engage with those maps, to be able to zoom in, click on lines on the maps that are recommendations, and see all of the information spatially. So you have that ability to be able to navigate and turn on and off layers of the maps for each of those modal recommendations. And then we have the traditional kind of PDF form, which has a lot more detail and available kind of background and methodology that is at a high level in the story map. So I'll walk through each mode, what the goals of that mode and recommendation, and then share a highlight of what the summary of the recommendations are. So starting with walking, the goal is to fill in gaps in the sidewalk network where there are not sidewalks present, or to upgrade places where there are deficient sidewalks or crosswalks or crossings. So we wanted to be able to create a prioritization system. So when the city, when a member of the community identifies a gap in the sidewalk network, the city understands how that gap falls as far as priority comprehensively across the city. Because of a lack of data understanding where those sidewalk gaps are, the pedestrian chapter of this plan is not a prescriptive set of projects that are prioritized, but rather a methodology where every street in the city of Longmont has a tier associated with it. And that tier was developed through a data-driven, community-based process to be able to understand how does that location rank relative to other locations in the city as far as a need for pedestrian access. What is the population like adjacent to that street as far as access to a vehicle or mobility challenges, what are the destinations where there might be vulnerable users there, or transit access was a big input in identifying that prioritization process. So when a complaint does come in or the city identifies a corridor for potential upgrade of the pedestrian network, you can look to this map to understand if it falls within tier 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. On the biking side, the goal is to make biking comfortable for people of all ages and abilities, and this means upgrading places where there are existing bike facilities that are not considered comfortable and adding in new bike facilities to fill in gaps in the bicycle network and to create a set of standards so that the bike facilities as they are planned and implemented meet those standards and have a low level of traffic stress. So the bike map was one of the catalysts for having this interactive web map. So you can zoom in and drag around and identify, click on proposed recommendations. Once you click on a proposed location, you can see what's the existing bike facility type and the existing what's called level of traffic stress. So every roadway gets a 1, 2, 3, or 4 level of traffic stress. 1, it's comfortable for all ages of abilities. 4 is what we call the strong and the fearless bicyclist. So we really want, the goal is to get every proposed roadway with an identified bike facility in the LTS, the level of traffic stress 1 and 2. So a lot of bike facilities that exist in Longmont today fall under 3 and 4. So this is a great example on Gay Street where a current bike lane is not considered comfortable for all ages and abilities. So a recommendation to buffer that bike lane or add a horizontal space between people biking and people driving will make that a comfortable bicycle facility. So the goal is to make it convenient and accessible for people wherever they are in Longmont to be able to bike comfortably through a connected environment. So this isn't just the corridors, but the crossings as well. On the transit side, improving transit within Longmont through both coverage and frequency. So we want to make sure that everyone is within close proximity to a bus stop, and that bus runs frequently in order to make transit a convenient and reliable option. So there are 2 phases of recommendations on the transit side, short-term recommendations and long-term. So starting on the short-term side, Ride Longmont, hugely successful, really high ridership, so continuing operating this on-demand service. Upgrading bus stops. So this is something that's within the city of Longmont's kind of privy and available recommendation for the city. Working with RTD and other providers as well, other partnering agencies, but to make sure that bus stops have benches, shelter, and ADA accessible landing pads is the top priority. And then the plan identifies, based off of boardings at each of those bus stops, which bus stops are the higher priority to fill in those gaps in amenities. The next recommendation on the short-term side is there's a number of regional BRT corridors that are helping connect Longmont across the region, and to be able to work with those providers in order to make sure that those BRT corridors are seamless and that the mobility hubs associated with them within the city of Longmont are providing an accessible and convenient option for people. So those are all in the works. It's on the implementation phase and making sure that we're working with RTD and others for seamless integration of BRT corridors. Long-term recommendations, continue upgrading bus stop amenities. So this is a kind of a multi-year process as there are a long list of amenities and a number of bus stops. So working down that list based off of boardings. And the next is identifying local transit options. So working with RTD and understanding the limited resources within RTD. So what can the city do to be able to increase coverage and frequency of transit? So in the short term, working with microtransit and continuing operating microtransit, and then the longer term looking at ridership of the microtransit service and understanding where these origin destination patterns are emerging and where there's an opportunity to convert an on-demand service to fixed route. So on-demand service is great for a number of reasons, but in large part to start to see where these travel patterns are, and where there's demand to operate a fixed route service that would be cost effective. Another input into identifying local routes is community input. So a lot of that was gathered during the Transportation Mobility Plan, but as the community evolves and as development patterns shift, to continue to understand that feedback from the community about desire for those key corridors for local routes. And then lastly, Boulder County is undergoing a strategic transit plan starting shortly, so working closely as a part of that process. And then on the short-term side, RTD has a feeder route plan that has a number of recommendations to the 300 series, so incorporating those short-term recommendations with the goal of 2027 implementation. So there are a number of updates and upgrades that will be coming to the 300 series that have been identified by RTD in a recent previous plan. On the roadway side, making driving safer, the integration of people driving with those walking, biking, and accessing transit as well. So the focus here is on safety and improving safety and setting up the Vision Zero Action Plan, which is upcoming for success. Capacity projects only to be completed when there is a safety element associated with them. So there are a number of different roadway project categories. There are intersection projects and there are corridor projects. The intersection projects fall under one of 6 categories. Safety improvements, which are all-encompassing with further study, understanding, and identifying whether that includes signal changes, upgrades to crosswalks, or if there's a identified bicycle corridor, that there are bicycle facilities at that intersection as well. A couple of locations that are recommended to be signalized that are not currently signalized. I believe there are only 2 capacity projects that had been previously identified that have safety investments and safety implications as well. Grade separated crossings for those walking or biking, whether that be a railroad grade separated crossing or along 66. There are a couple of locations to separate people walking and biking from people driving. Grade separated crossings for all modes, not just walking and biking, but roadways as well. And then a roundabout that falls under other. On the corridor side, again, just 1 or 2 capacity projects that have been previously identified, and then multimodal projects that involve kind of improvements for people walking, biking, and driving, and then a handful of new roadways as well. The orange bicycle-related projects are locations that were identified in the bike map as having a priority bicycle corridor that would require reallocation of roadway space. So that's removal of a travel lane, parking lane, or turn lane in order to create the space for a bicycle facility. So the roadway map and the bicycle map play together and are important to be looked at in tandem, as when the city is implementing a roadway project or a bicycle project, these should be their cost effectiveness in implementing projects along a corridor concurrently. On the programmatic side, the goal is to make non-driving modes easier and more comfortable and more accessible. So these infrastructure projects need to be supplemented and complemented by programmatic investments in order to start to see that mode shift and culture shift and really improve the options for people working and living in Longmont. So the programmatic recommendations, there are a number of them and they run the gamut. So just running through these quickly: maintenance, whether it be snow removal, debris removal, pothole. So this is for all modes, continuing to maintain the system. This was a really important part of the financial element and thinking about the budget, and as the city invests and expands its multimodal network, that the allocation for budget to maintain these new facilities is growing in tandem with the growth of the multimodal network as well. Supplementing bike facilities with amenities such as end-of-trip facilities like bike parking, benches, shade is important to create that comfortable experience. Wayfinding and signage makes the system intuitive. Access to parking, making sure that people aren't cruising for parking. So there's a 2022 wayfinding plan. The TMP builds off of that and recommends implementation of that wayfinding plan in the short term. Emergency and evacuation planning ties into the roadway system and is obviously important, and resiliency and building off of previous work that the city's done there. Curbside and management and parking management. So thinking about dynamic curbside management, what's the highest and best use of curb space and how can that use change days of the week, time of day, in order to make sure that this valuable real estate is being optimized and is intuitive for people. Again, there's a safety element here as well. So 15-minute loading zones is a great example of that. E-bikes, this was a really big theme we heard from the community as this mode and emerging modes, such as hoverboards and class 1 through 3 e-bikes grow, making sure that we're educating the community about proper and safe use of e-bikes and setting policies regarding speed limits for e-bikes and where e-bikes are allowed and not allowed. Vision Zero, safety is integrated in the TMP, but really this next year is going to be huge for the city of Longmont in terms of identifying safety projects and prioritizing those projects and dedicating funding for improving safety for all modes. Specifically, safe routes to school and identifying both those programmatic and infrastructure improvements in areas adjacent to school. Continuing to collect data, understanding where the community needs are and where there are gaps to be able to reinvest and shift priorities for the city over time. Similar set of programs around emerging mobility and innovation. So transportation is continuing to evolve. The TMP is updated regularly, but want to make sure that this document is forward thinking and setting the city up for success as transportation evolves quickly. So ITS stands for Intelligent Transportation System and is all about connecting vehicles with infrastructure. So thinking about as our vehicle fleet turns over that we're creating a really efficient and safe system where vehicles are able to communicate with infrastructure such as signals in order to be able to better use and optimize the resources and the roadways that are available today. And this really creates the foundation for why there are very, very few capacity projects, is being able to be more efficient with the resources that the city does have. Automated enforcement. I know the Safe Streets for All funding that was awarded to the city of Longmont for cameras will set this piece up really well, but you can't just lower speed limits on roads, and traffic calming devices need to be supplemented by enforcement in order to ensure that vehicles are traveling at the posted speed limit. Autonomous and connected vehicles. So on the horizon, I know people have been saying that for a very long time, but being able to set policies in place before AVs are online will ensure that there aren't zero occupancy vehicles and that there's the sticks and carrots in place to reduce vehicle miles traveled that might be associated with a lower opportunity cost with driving. Electric vehicles, it was great to hear this conversation in advance of our agenda item, but as the EV fleet expands, making sure that there's public charging stations and that the city's fleet is also being electrified. Shared micromobility, we'll talk about this on the implementation side, but great news regarding the CAMP grant to be able to implement an e-bike docked bike share program both in Longmont and then connecting that regionally. Car share is another way that allows people to be car light or car free to provide that option when people do need to drive, and being able to have a shared fleet of vehicles to reduce the resources. Implementation. So all projects, whether that be bicycle, roadway, or on the pedestrian side, were prioritized to give the city a guide as to when funding becomes available, what projects should be implemented first. That prioritization process is data-driven as well as informed by the community's priorities. So thinking about what projects are close to key destinations like trailheads and schools, what projects are in locations with a high crash history, what are the demographics around those projects, and all of those pieces come together through a spatial analysis to create that prioritized list of projects. Plan monitoring tables, so building off of Longmont indicators to be able to track success over time and create that transparency and accountability with the community to show that the TMP is being implemented and that there are positive kind of progress associated with that implementation. And then the TMP has identified funding sources. So thinking especially about state and local funding options and expanding funding from today, what are some grant opportunities that the TMP has set City of Longmont up for success with and that you would be competitive in applying for, and what projects are eligible for those different grants. Through all of this, the themes and the priorities are safety, improving safety for the city, for people walking, biking, taking transit, and driving, creating a really connected and comprehensive bicycle network, and then expanding coverage and frequency of transit are the main themes. The short-term priority projects and priority kind of identified things for implementation are Vision Zero Action Plan, creating a TDM model ordinance and thinking about how transportation and land use interact and working with commuting solutions. We talked about e-bike share, implementation of a docked system that works regionally as well, and then bicycle parking standards. So a more nuanced set of standards of how much bicycle parking, what type of bicycle parking is required depending on the land use type. So the process in the last month, the draft plan has been available for public review, both the PDF document as well as the interactive story map. We received 24 comments, of which we have incorporated the majority of what we've heard from the community, so really great feedback. Phil, in combination with the team, has presented to the Senior Citizen Advisory Board, TAB, Senior Sustainability Advisory Board, and the Planning and Zoning Commission as well.
I guess I'll just finish up by saying that all of those boards did recommend that the city council accept this plan without any significant changes. And so we're asking tonight that the city council move to accept the 2025 Transportation Mobility Plan as the new transportation plan for the city, and that will be incorporated as we move into the Envision Longmont next step process in the next 1 to 2 years, maybe more, but we'll see what that time frame is. But once that gets into its final processes, then we'll be able to take Envision Longmont, add this piece as we did with the current transportation plan that's part of that piece, if that makes sense. So once that moves forward and is in its final stages, we'll put it all together, and then you'll have a full Envision Longmont plan with this being the transportation component. Are there any questions?
First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. I know that there's been a lot of work going into this, and it shows. And again, I'll open it up for comments or questions from council. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, this was a great presentation, great plan. You know, I've been kind of in and out of some of the steps along the way, and just the attention that you've given, especially in looking at the map, where I was eyeing, where I often hear from residents in Ward 3, what are some of those areas along 21st Avenue and Hover, and looking at specific areas, it was like, okay, yeah, they captured that. Okay, they captured that. Back to the map where it had the colors, the blue lines, I think for new roads, that one. Okay, I was, in some of them, I could be, my eyes are just tired, but for new roadways, I only saw two areas that reflect where there will be new roadways. Is that correct? On the bottom, just to the southeast, and over by Vance Brand Airport. Is that correct? Or is there another?
Councilmember, correct. You are correct. Those are roadways that are kind of left over from our Envision Longmont process. We didn't want to take them off. We want to keep them on just for planning purposes. But those, you are correct.
Okay, and then is the plan then to where these new roadways will be? Is this something that is it going to be bumped up as priority, or is it addressed as needed?
Councilmember,
or as funds become available, I guess.
Well, and I think these are mostly developer driven too.
Okay.
There's a few on the southeast side of town that are kind of historic and stay on the plan just in case we need more connectivity.
Okay.
But the ones that are that are closer to Vance Brand Airport really reflect developer driven new roadway development.
Got it. Okay, that was helpful. Thank you.
You got any other comments? Can I have Councilor Popkin?
Thank you. I was trying to see if anyone else had other questions or comments before I jumped in. I'm going to first echo the mayor and say thank you to Phil and the team and everyone in frankly, everyone in the city, not just the transportation department, that contributed to this, because it's a massive effort and it really shows. Not just the effort, but the coordination across at least 4 different other advisory boards. And a little bit of an effort over the last couple of days responding to at least 16 questions that I sent to staff this week. So I won't reiterate all of those questions, but some of them I do have follow-ups on. So apologies to my fellow council members. This is a bit of a list because I think there are some significant aspects of this that we need to make sure that we discuss. The first is just an FYI. On page 8 of the plan, I think there's just a typo. It says 25% and 28% for the percentage of folks that work from home. I'm guessing that was a typo on the 25% in the text, given that there was a 25.5 right before that. Let's just update that for consistency. Then, Phil, we had a little bit of a back and forth via email on transit ridership statistics, and I wanted to unpack that a little bit more here because I think it's either confusing, misleading, or disappointing, and I'm not sure which. And so let's start with the clarification. So on table 1 on page 12 of the TMP shows a chart with the route name, the number of boardings, and the percentage of total. We can pull it up there if helpful, but if you have it up, that's fine as well. So this from what I am understanding from this, and I think from Phil's clarifications via email, this chart is showing the number of boardings over the course of the per month over the course of January to May 2023 per route. Is that correct?
It's the cumulative January through May. So the way RTD does their ridership is they do a service planning update every January, May, and then August. So they collect ridership data when the route is consistent. So January through May. So I believe it's 140 days. So per your email, I calculated the daily ridership, and I can update the table and add that too. So so your numbers were just a little off because
I think I used 150 for the number of days. I was averaging 30 days per month.
So we can add a column in to identify number of days, but it's ridership across the entire, or boardings across the entire route from the dates of January 8th to May 28th. So daily, we can calculate average daily ridership as well. And so that is supplemented by the map, which shows local boardings at Longmont bus stops. So the size of the circle reflects the number of boardings locally.
Got it.
Just within Longmont.
Thank you for that clarification. So my math is slightly off, but largely within the order of magnitude that I was going for here. And so I guess that leads me to my second point. I will wait for one moment.
We probably need to confirm that because I understand that there's roughly, we've been working with RTD for years, 20 plus years on the data, and typically we'll see about 1,000 to about 1,400 to 1,500 riders per day. So that's on our four local. That's on our four local routes. So we do need to check. I still think it's over the 5 months. It's an average monthly for those 5 months. So we do get a lot more than 28 riders per day on a bus. So just to kind of break it down, I kind of went through, I have some yearly numbers here too.
So even on an average monthly, that would be approximately 80-ish riders per day, if I'm doing the mental math correct there.
Well, in looking at the yearly totals, we get about at least 150 to almost 670 for one of our routes per day on the buses. So we need to go back through these numbers and just confirm. We've had a tough time working with our transit providers to get their numbers because since 2020, with things changing,
sure,
a lot of the data has been more difficult to get. In fact, we had to do a public records request for this latest data that just came in late last week. So
you had to do a public records request to get it from our partner transit agency?
I will say yes, we did.
Thank you for clarifying that on the record. Okay, then we won't stick on the numbers here. I think it would be important for us to make sure that when this plan is finalized, we get the data correct for this and make sure that it's clearly defined for the the study period that we have here. Because right now this looks like a very low ridership amount, and that has direct implications as to like what we might want to prioritize here and what kind of routes we might want to set up that should inform our decision making on transit routes, the 7 other routes that we talk about kind of amending and adjusting, and the prioritization of that, especially as it relates to Ride Longmont, that the city led by you here have created a really valuable service here. Most of the routes that we're talking about here are actually serving almost entirely, if not exclusively, within the municipal service area that Ride Longmont also serves, right? So in theory, there could be redundancy here between the routes and the service that we are now offering that's even more convenient for folks, and I presume we're getting even more riders from. Is that correct?
We get about 190 to 210 trips per day on the Ride Longmont.
So
with the 5 vehicles that are out there today, yes.
So depending on exactly what data we need to update here, that could be more in the Ride Longmont program than we do in each of these routes individually, at least.
That's why we need to make sure those numbers are correct. Yes, sir.
Great. Let's definitely do that. I think this has long-term implications as to where we should be investing in terms of transit. And I absolutely support transit when it is efficient and convenient for people. And I think the interesting thing is we've designed an even more convenient service for residents of Longmont here with the Ride Longmont that might inherently displace some of the other routes without taking away transportation convenience or accessibility to anyone who currently uses those routes, because they're all served still through an on-demand request opportunity. So I know that's not maybe a policy decision we're making today, but I think when we think about long-term budget investments in transit routes, we should be very strategically thinking about what is redundant with Longmont Ride or Ride Longmont and what is not, what is additive to. Because when I look at this entire document, I guess my question for you, and maybe this is also a question for our city manager, is this a policy prescription document? Is this a visioning document? Is this a prioritization plan? Is this a prioritization to inform our budget planning process come the fall? I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, I think the idea was, starting out in this planning process, was really to build that framework, that what we call the 45,000 foot level look at what transportation is really supposed to be in the next 25 years for this community. And so in asking that question of the council, of our boards and commissions, of our steering committee, of the citizens, those are the answers that we got back, was how to frame that network with all the different layers, including all the different layers of transit, roadways, walking, bicycling, including micro mobility and micro transit options. So the different, scooters, all of the above, right? So we're trying to layer it all so it all can work together. So it really is about putting it all together at this higher level framework piece, and then using those other pieces that you saw, Vision Zero, and some of these other things to really bring it back to the ground as far as how we implement the specific programs of the plan.
Right. So it's both high level and at the same time extremely detailed in prioritization and dollars, right? Like you have pages and pages and charts in here about the recommended facility type for bikes in this case, which streets they're going to and from, which is commendable level of detail in terms of understanding that. But attached to that is also this prioritization score, which suggests to me, especially next to a cost and planning horizon, short-term, medium-term, long-term. So that suggests to me that this is a strategic prioritization guiding document at a minimum, if not explicit prescription. And so I guess I'm curious, like, how should I understand this, considering that we haven't approved any of the fund or most of the funding, to my knowledge, that's listed here, yet we have specific priorities. So I'm not challenging what this is. I'm trying to understand more what it is, though, and how we should be using it.
Council member, we really do want to put the different pieces that you see in the maps together so people can understand that each one of those is a project. Prioritizing it and then providing some level of planning level cost. These aren't exact costs in any way, shape, or form, but a planning level cost with that prioritization. So it gives our folks other tools to use as we're putting together these capital improvement programs for the 5-year implementation, or the 5-year increments that we use. So this gives us the 25-year plan. We can put that together, but each year we do a different 5-year CIP. So it gives our folks some ideas of how we could prioritize. It doesn't say, this is the first one you have to do, this is the second one you have to do. It just says, as we're putting together the program of projects, here's a way that we can start to look at the capital improvement program, so that it builds that priority in. And I see you wincing a bit, but
well, it's hard to take you're not saying this is the first thing and this is the second thing when I'm seeing the highest ranked prioritization score in the shortest planning horizon.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, if you put 2 and 2 together, it does equal 4. And so I'm trying to understand like how it's not that.
Again, it's just a tool in our toolbox to be able to prioritize as we're starting to take these projects forward.
Okay.
We can share that with other departments and say, here's what this plan came up with as far as prioritization, but we need to figure out with our financial pieces of that and what needs to be done for the city as far as getting other things done. We already have a 5-year CIP set right now, so we're not talking about doing a wholesale change of that.
Mm-hmm.
What we're saying is as we start to move forward to the next year's budget, here's the way that things could go forward. If you want to start looking at bicycle projects, if you want to start looking at the roadway projects, how do those fit together in a way so that
Okay.
you can see the prioritization?
So the interesting thing is I heard the presentation at the Sustainability Advisory Board on this. I was present at the time in a different capacity on the Planning and Zoning Commission when we presented this. And I don't really recall a level of detail on like which, and maybe this is each of the board's fault, but I don't recall getting into the detail there of the specific types of like where the priorities are. Is that my timer?
Yes, it is.
Cool. If you don't mind, I'm going to keep proceeding because I have a few questions. I'll pause for Councilmember Christ in a moment, but I'd like to finish this line of questioning, if that's all right.
How long do you have?
Well, I have about 6 more questions after this one.
I would suggest you meet with the transportation team offline.
I appreciate that, but I'm not comfortable voting for this right now in its current form because of a few things that I'd like to discuss. And I have met with our Director of Transportation and our City Manager on this as well. So I'm not trying to delay this. There are multiple clarifications and questions that I had, including corrections that I've already pointed out that our other boards and commissions did not catch. So if you don't mind, I will be as efficient as I can, but I would like to continue a few more questions.
Can you ask the question in 1 sentence and let them answer it?
I will do my best to do that. So did the advisory boards weigh in on the prioritization of each of the recommendations in those charts that I'm seeing that have a specific dollar amount and time horizon? Because I think that's what's really interesting here is that it directly informs, kind of in theory, a budget prioritization.
The way we explained it, Councilmember, was that we asked them to look at the general and not the specific. So we were specifically trying to say that these weren't the way all the projects would necessarily move forward systematically, but that it was in a general statement of planning level costs with a prioritization to give us as staff a better idea of how we could move projects into programs as dollars came available. I mean, this also includes grant dollars that we don't even know about. So it's not just what the city has, it's how we leverage those dollars in future projects too. So some of those projects that are very high priority don't have all the funding available because those may be federal or state or regional dollars that we could leverage some of our dollars against. So it's really hard for us to say, yes, this one goes first because we may not have the dollars close to available, but we have to go for these other grants. And as you know, our federal funding grant levels have certainly been cut. So, but this just gives us another way of how do we measure against other projects and gives us some level of that cost detail so we can understand, could we move forward with this one because it's a lower cost, put it up above, and is it close enough in priority to make those jumps in the project list? So sorry for the long-winded answer, but it really does go to the idea that there's a lot of money out there that we don't have as a city, but we're going to go after as a city.
Got it. I appreciate that. I will reserve some time right now for my fellow council member in case she has questions that I have as well.
And we're going to stick to the 5 minutes. So Councilor Christ.
So my comment is a load of praise, actually. I think this document reads very well. It's easy to get engaged with it. I was saying to Phil earlier that some of the bike paths, it just almost had a visceral reaction when it talked about the feeling of safety because, yeah, I feel that lack of safety or the very safe, you know, and we tend to go to certain routes for that reason. I do want to add, I just had one thing I wanted to say, which is, I think it's where it says future vision goals. In number 2, it talks about developing opportunity. And I just want to have an awareness of emerging technologies, because I think we're at this pivot point where things are going to change. So let's keep that in the mix. And other than that, very, very well done. And I know there were hours and hours put into this, and years actually. And RTD is a hard system to pin down, just FYI. So, yeah. So thank you, Phil and Carrie.
Are there any other council? One more question. Seriously, we're sticking to the 5 minutes, Councillor Popkin. It's the rules of procedure.
I guess point of parliamentary procedure, though. I was under the impression that it was at least a 3-minute follow-up once other council members have gone. Is that not what we're following?
Aha. Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. So a couple quick questions here. So the coordination with, so there's a part on the bike planning process where there's effectively the map shows basically a route that goes out past Union Reservoir that connects to nothing. And I'm genuinely curious, like, I think that's a long-term plan there for that route, but is there a vision and long-term arrangement or intention of coordinating with Weld County or Firestone to connect to something there?
Councilmember, absolutely. That shows the edge of our planning area. So that's just going out to the edge of the planning area. The other red dotted lines typically have an arrow to show further continuance. This one could have that as well and probably show that more effectively. But we are working directly with Firestone, Weld County, Meade to get that trail out all the way to I-25.
Awesome. Love that. Can we show the arrow? Fantastic. Likewise, on the other side of town, there's a bike improvement. This was a question I asked you, Phil, via email, just south of Vance Brand Airport. And I think you clarified, if I'm recalling the email correctly, that that was a short-term priority because of some development that's coming in there. Can you elaborate on why that's going out to the west side of town, just below the airport, in another way that doesn't seem to connect?
Yes, Councilmember, I think what I was trying to say is that was a good thing to point out. I don't think it shows on this map, but the one that you were referring to in the actual PDF document does show a short-term improvement on something that would be done by a future developer, and we don't have knowledge of a developer coming in at this time, so I would probably remove that and put it to a medium term based on your suggestion.
Got it. Thank you. And then on a general note, like, do we typically have kind of bicycle network and other pedestrian network improvements that are based on kind of what developers want there, or how is that determined?
Councilmember, those are based on what the city wants to put in, but it's a lot of it's things that we see the developer bringing forward as they come forward with their development, things that the city wouldn't necessarily build at this time, and see how the development proceeds and get them done at that time.
Okay, thank you. Love seeing the bike share included here. I know that's been a lot of work. Would love to see more on the car share. I saw that you described that in there, and I don't know, is there a reason that's not in the TDM strategies?
It's one of the programmatic recommendations. So there's currently a Colorado car share parking space. The recommendation is to identify more locations for Colorado car share or other car share providers. So that's identified in the programs.
Great. Perhaps we could consider whether that would be appropriate to have in code for large multifamily properties as a requirement, or as an option at least. Likewise, I saw on page 94 of the TMP that the bike parking still, I know you mentioned on the slide that you're planning to bring parking code updates for bikes, but it still refers to the 5% in our code, and looking forward, that feels like a mistake or something we should note is changing. Is that something we can update if we're truly updating the land use code for bike parking?
Councilmember, we're ready to do that if requested, yes.
Do you need us to request that officially?
We do list it as a future, as a future implementation piece, but
Great. Well, unless any of my fellow council members have an objection, I would love to encourage us to update that, so that they can speak up if they have any objections. Two last questions here. County Fairgrounds, I don't see that referenced. We got a couple comments from the public that wasn't kind of part of the connectivity there. From my knowledge of that region, there's a lot of things that are very close to connecting there, or already do in some parts of it, particularly the northeast side. So I'm wondering if we can just update that. And I'll ask my final question, which is, could you elaborate on the value of neighborhood bikeways strategy? Did you? As a point of personal privilege, I read a 114-page document here. And
So did we. So did I.
We all read it.
Great.
Okay. I need a motion.
So
Okay. City Manager.
if I can jump in real quick, one of the things that Phil and I have talked about is I think we need to also be cognizant of that we have to be careful with how prescriptive
Yes.
we think this is, simply because there are things that we've recently implemented that, as we understand the data and what that means, could very well facilitate changes.
Right.
So, for example, we talked about Ride Longmont, and then how prolific is that going to continue to grow in our community? That's likely to adjust how we look at our bus routes. And as we think about things potentially coming when we talk about rail and that discussion, those are things we're going to be evaluating real time, that we will be communicating with council on, because we don't fully know, what a full year is going to look like. And so I just wanted to caution council and also lay it out there, as we have to be careful that we treat this as being too prescriptive, because as we know, the world's changing very fast around us, to the point that some of you brought up, and we'll be taking that into consideration.
And these are plans. They're not solidified. They are plans of what we want to be able to do in our city. If we get the funding, if things don't change, if we don't have a major flood that wipes us all out anyway. It's a plan for the future. So thank you. Councillor McCoy. No, I'm sorry, Krista.
I move we accept the transportation mobility plan as the new transportation guidance for the city.
Second.
It's been moved by Councillor Chris, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Hidalgo Faring. Is there any discussion? Councillor Popkin.
Thank you, Mayor. There's one more question that I have before I can vote on this, because it impacts the kind of the whole breakdown of the bike section of the plan, which is I'm not clear on what the value add of the neighborhood neighborhood bikeways are, and what the efficacy versus efficiency or benefit is. And so that would be really helpful. I understand what they are in picture and in practice, but how valuable they are relative to other strategies.
So this is built off of research on level of traffic stress that identifies low speed, low volume roadways where a shared bikeway is considered acceptable and comfortable for people of all ages and abilities. So this is roadways with posted speed limits of 25 miles per hour that are coded as local roadways in the street classification, where a shared neighborhood bikeway is appropriate. So this is signing and striping, acknowledging that people biking may be present and creating low speed and comfortable experiences for people biking to share the roadway with people driving. Intersections are a really important element, so creating kind of either flipping stop signs or low speeds where people driving will observe and people biking will be visible to those driving.
Got it. Some of that visibility is fairly expensive, and so maybe it's not relative to others, but I'd encourage us to think about that when it comes time to actual budgeting on strategies. What's the right thing to prioritize? As a point of, parliamentary procedure or clarification, I just want to understand when we're talking, again, forgive my ignorance here, when we're having a conversation with staff on some of these items and there are like edits or updates, are those like automatically like, if they aren't protested by other council members, like incorporated into the update when we vote to accept? How does that work?
We accept, if we vote to accept the plan, it is as presented. If there's an update or an amendment or whatever, that can be made at the time. But if there's an update, it's usually, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, but that is made on data. An update to the plan sometimes is made on data received about the plan after it has been in practice. Is that what you're talking about?
Kind of. I mean, there were a few
Okay.
corrections on numbers. There was an entire
Oh,
chart.
that's made immediately.
Administrative.
Yeah.
And then there was the land use code bike parking update as well. That'll be a future agenda item to update on.
Yes. What we'd like to do is, again, this is the framework, this is very high level. What we'd like to do is make the recommended changes that we've seen from the public in those 3 weeks that it was out there and with the city council, what you've mentioned tonight, as well as some other pieces and some other minor edits, and just get that done. But because this is not prescriptive in any way, so it's not meant to be a prescriptive document. We're just asking for that acceptance at this level and administrative changes allowed by this group, because none of this has been, it hasn't been finalized to the point of needing a resolution or an ordinance. Once it gets into the envisioned Longmont plan, it'll have all those different pieces finalized for that piece. But this is really just to get that acceptance of that overview.
So with the changes that Councilor Popkin made, you've taken them down and okay. So those would come back to us on first reading, or?
Only with when the envision Longmont comes back to
Right.
the council,
Okay.
then it would come back as part of that ordinance piece that we
Okay.
need to do.
So, in point of parliamentary procedure again, does that inherently come before the next budget cycle?
Not the envision Longmont piece, no.
Mm-mm.
Okay. And
But we will use this document to help guide our budgetary processes for the 5-year CIP.
yeah, that's what I'm confused by, because it seems like we should be crisper on some of what's being prioritized, and I don't know if we've had that kind of discussion here today. So with that, I can't support this right now in its current form.
Okay, any other comments? Let's vote, please. And that carries, you do have to vote. You can't abstain. Can we do this again, please?
Sorry, point of parliamentary procedure. Why can't I abstain? It's in the charter. We're not allowed to abstain on any vote?
No.
Okay, that would be a good answer then. Thank you.
And then you can't vote. So that carries 6-1 with Councilor Popkin in opposition. Thank you very much for this and for answering all our questions.
Thank you. Thanks for getting this done before my supervisor retires on the 6th. Thank you.
Oh, I know. All right, we're now on to the next item on general business, which is the zero reading, a bill for an ordinance amending the Title 10 of the Longmont Municipal Code concerning residency distance requirements for registered sex offenders. I do think that all of council got the emails from our chief artist.
One was not clear, yes.
Well, you can discuss that.
Want to break before we start?
I think that would be a good idea. Let's take a 5-minute break. Counselors? Now I need to know what Reddit says. Not a good day. I'm glad I'm leaving in the morning. I'm leaving in the morning.
Your mic's on, by the way.
That's fine.
Just let you know.
Counselors? Okay. Now we are at the zero reading, a bill for an ordinance amending the Title 10 of the Longmont Municipal Code concerning residency distance requirements for registered sex offenders. And I welcome Zach Artis, and our Public Safety Chief, and Jeremy as our legal counsel. Of course, our city attorney as well.
And I'll be joining the group in the
And our
presentation.
city manager.
Mayor. So if we can go to the first slide. So obviously you all know that at the last council meeting, there was a group of residents that approached the council regarding the situation that we're here to talk about today. This is oftentimes we run into, and we talked about this at the retreat, where there are times where things are operational, things have a policy component, and there's areas where these two things start to overlap. And so I want to go through the operational piece and give you a high-level overview to answer some questions that was presented to council to really set the stage for the conversation. So the first question is did we know about this home through the permitting process? And this is really, again, focusing on the operational. And the answer to that's no. The permit did not indicate the use of this home, which is going to be important as we talk about the operational piece of this. What happens is, in that case, is that you then have operational issues based on the type of use, and I'll get into this in more detail in future slides. And typically what we find is that touches on building and fire codes. And then we move into the policy question as we're going through this presentation. Next slide. The best way to give you a visual description on this is when we look at, and I'm going to talk about group homes generally, there is an operational component, which is building code, fire code, and other codes that we have that are really dealing with life safety issues. In this case, when we talk about sexual offenders, that is really where the policy question is going to set for council to consider as we move through this presentation. If you see this and you see the dark blue line, the next slide will talk about where there's an overlap on the two issues that also comes into play. Next slide. State law exempts local land use control in the following areas: group homes for intellectual and development disabilities, age 60 plus years but not nursing facilities, behavioral or mental disorders screened by the state, alcohol or substance abuse recovery services and support. So this is that dark blue line, if you remember that diagram, where if somebody came in and said, we're going to do a recovery center for alcohol and substance abuse, but then at the same time it houses sexual offenders, that's the crux of part of the question that was brought to you by the residents when we began looking at these issues. Even though land use control is addressed in these categories, at the same time, the legislation specifically says that these types of facilities must meet building and fire code. Due to the way that this permit was requested, we don't have the ability to make the determination whether or not they meet the requirements of building and fire code today. We have reached out and had a conversation with the individual and indicated that we're going to request information so that we can make that determination. Next slide. If it's determined that the home has to meet additional code requirements, staff will proceed as we normally do with any other building, any other home in the community, and make sure that the life safety issues are dealt with. once they then have a choice to comply or not comply. If they choose not to comply, we'll deal with the issue just like we would with any other property in the community. If they choose to comply with the code requirements, that's where the operational side ends. And they will have met the code requirements required for group homes from a building and fire code standpoint. And at that point, the operational piece is complete in terms of how we deal with this situation. Next slide. This is where we're starting to transition the conversation to council so that you can give policy direction to staff. One of the things that we wanted to point out in this is that when we think about the components that were addressed in state law, it is very clear that sexual offender group homes are not regulated through state or local legislation as we look at it today. And I think that is part of the crux of what council has to consider. So I'm going to start with a question, and council has a few choices that you can make. One, do you want to consider a local ordinance regulating sexual offender residency requirements? Right now, you could say no, you could say yes. If you say yes, we have a series of slides that we can go over with you all to continue moving forward, or you could say, not really sure, but we want to see the rest of the slides. And so this is just a touch point with council to go to ask you this question. We're going to ask you this question again at the end of the presentation if we move forward. But I wanted to give you all the ability to weigh in at this point.
Thank you. Well, let's start with Councilor Popkin, because as to whether do you want to answer this question. Does council, turn on your mic, and we're going to go down the line. We need an answer on this.
Well, I wasn't prepared to talk here at this
I know. That's why I called on you. I thought, surprise.
I would be in favor of exploring certain options so long as they don't create unintended consequences.
Okay. Councilor McCoy?
Oh, it's me.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I would agree with that, the last thing we want to do is to create unintended consequences, but I would agree, let's move forward and see what we've got going here.
Thank you. Councilor Christ?
I will consider a local ordinance, and I would like to hear more.
Yes.
Yes, but after additional executive session time.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're going to move forward with the presentation now, council. I would like to remind you this is zero reading. And so as we're going to go through and provide you with some additional information at the end of this, if we still say on yes, I think it's important for us to get clarity from council in terms if there's anything else you want us to provide you, if there's anything else you want us to consider as we're doing this. So as we're presenting this information, if you'll just think about those questions so we can dig into it at the end, we would appreciate it. Zach, it's your turn.
Mayor, Council, Zach Artis, Public Safety Chief for the City of Longmont. As council considers their options, we wanted to provide just a kind of a brief overview from the public safety standpoint as far as just some things for council to consider that you may or may not already know. We wanted to talk really just briefly about the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony as we begin to talk through different types of sexual offenses for the state of Colorado. Really the primary difference between the two is a misdemeanor is a less serious crime. It typically has jail of less than 1 year. Fines are minimum, probation, and community service. When you talk about a felony charge in the state of Colorado, it's a more serious crime. It's usually punishable by at least 1 year or more in prison, significant fines and other penalties that the court deems that they feel to issue to the individual offender that has been convicted. When we talk about misdemeanor sex crimes and felony sex crimes, wanted to just kind of give you an example of a few just so that you kind of have some context of what we're talking about. When you talk about unlawful sexual contact, is a misdemeanor crime in the state of Colorado. It's unwanted touching of intimate parts with no penetration for sexual gratification. Indecent exposure of intimate parts areas for sexual gratification. And then invasion of privacy for sexual gratification is basically knowing, observing, or photographing another intimate parts without consent, where there is a reasonable expectation of privacy. When you look at felony sex crimes, you fall in the area of sexual assault, which is having sexual relations with a victim that does not consent or is incapable of consenting. You have sexual assault on a child by one in a position of trust. It's basically the child has to be under the age of 18, and it's usually done, the offender is usually a parent, teacher, counselor, medical professional, or et cetera, that has trust or control over them. You also have sexual exploitation of a child. Again, a child that's under the age of 18 years old is enticed or causes or permits a child to engage in any sexual conduct for the purpose of making sexually explicit material. These are only just a few of the crimes, both misdemeanor and felony in the state of Colorado. There's quite a few. We just wanted to give you just a few examples just to kind of give you a basis of kind of what we talk about when we talk about a felony versus a misdemeanor. If you have questions about that later on. What we wanted to talk about also is just overview in the Colorado statute. There's something referred to as a sexual violent offender, also known as the SVP. And so the simplest terms I can give you for that to understand, it's an individual convicted of a sexual offense. Doesn't matter if it's a felony or it's a misdemeanor. You can still be called a sexually violent offender. But what you have to do is you have to meet certain state statutory requirements. This does not necessarily mean that the crime was committed, was violent act or violent, but it indicates you have a a higher likelihood of reoffending. So I just wanted to make that clear. You can be an SVP with a misdemeanor conviction or a felony conviction, but it is based on the likelihood of you reoffending. The ordinance overview for the residency ordinance potentially could include the following. Who is impacted? It would impact individuals convicted of a felony sexual offense who are required to register. It's individuals convicted of multiple times of sexual offenses involving a single victim who are required to register, or individuals convicted of multiple times of sexual offenses involving multiple victims who are registered to require. The registered required part is reference to the state of Colorado, requires you to register as a sex offender with your local law enforcement agency. And then some of those are also published, are required to be published on the CBI's website. The restrictions could potentially be maintaining a distance of 1,000 feet from any school, park, recreation center, swimming pool, or child care facility or center. Must maintain a distance of 500 feet from any public trail, open space, or public land. The exemptions could be, is currently registered sex offenders would be allowed to continue to residing in their current locations if they do not relocate. And what I mean by that is that council could consider an exemption which allow individuals who are current sexual offenders that live in the city of Longmont to stay where they currently are, meaning that they could live closer than 1,000 feet to a school or 500 feet to a park. But if they chose at any time to move from that residence, they would then have to comply potentially with the new guidances. So this time I'll turn it over to Jeremy.
Thank you and good evening, Mayor and Council. Jeremy Terrell, Assistant City Attorney. I just want to provide a kind of general overview of, where the states are on this issue and where some local jurisdictions are, just to give a little more context and flavor to what we're talking about tonight. In terms of the states, approximately 30 states have some sort of distance-based residency restriction concerning sex offenders. So on this map I pulled up, the ones in blue have a distance requirement for all registrants. The ones that have the kind of diagonal lines have certain distance restrictions on persons under supervision. There's certain levels and offenses for the bolder lines going the opposite direction. So it could be that someone who's an SVP or someone who has a felony has to register, but someone who's just a non-SVP, non-felony sex offender wouldn't have to have the distance requirements. And then the dots are where states don't have a restriction in place statewide, but local restrictions do. So you see that Colorado is one of the dotted jurisdictions for the states. So Colorado does not have a statewide requirement, but there are local jurisdictions that do. So looking at a more granular level of the state of Colorado, approximately 35 jurisdictions, and when I say jurisdictions, I mean cities, towns, and counties, or cities and counties, have some form of residency restriction concerning registered sex offenders. I'm going to talk a little bit about ones that do, but in terms of ones that do not, some notable ones, or some at least local or comparatively sized ones to Longmont, include Denver, Boulder, Erie, Golden, Centennial, and Loveland. Looks like part of mine's cut off, but these are some jurisdictions that are either comparable in size or local or what's notable for the city of Longmont in terms of ones that have distance or some sort of restriction. So the city of North Glen, which is very similar to the draft ordinance that's attached as a 0 reading just for consideration, has sexually violent predators, persons who are registrants who are felons, registrants who have multiple victims or multiple offenses. North Glen's 1,000 feet from a school, 500 feet from a park, playground, daycare, rec center, pool, or school bus stop. Westminster's ordinance only concerns sexually violent predators. There's a distance requirement there for 1,000 feet from a school, park, rec center, pool, daycare, and 500 feet from a public trail. Firestone applies to any sex offender who's a registrant. So that could be someone with a misdemeanor or felony, but someone who's under state statute is required to register with the local jurisdiction. For Firestone, it's 1,000 feet from a school, daycare, school bus stop, parks, trails, open space, and swimming pools. Greeley is kind of an interesting one. Theirs is sexually violent predators, felons, sex offenders with multiple victims and offenses, but only in all cases where the victim's less than 18 years of old. So even for sexually violent predators, if the crime was committed against an adult, the Greeley ordinance is not triggered. Greeley is 300 feet from a school, park, or rec center or pool. Broomfield and Littleton have a restriction on all registrants. Their restriction is a little bit different as well. They limit 1 sex offender registrant per dwelling unit. So we're talking about apartment, single-family home, condo. It could also be a group home as a dwelling unit based on their code. Arvada is also any registrant, but they only limit it to group homes. So you could have more than 1 sex offender registrant in a single family or multifamily dwelling unit, but they do not allow more than 1 registrant per group home. And then Commerce City is cut off near the bottom. Theirs also applies to any registrant. So any registrant has to be 1,000 feet from parks, playgrounds, school, ball fields, and daycare facilities. And then they have a special carve out for sexually violent predators, which I believe was pools and trails was the end of that sentence that got cut off. So that's just kind of a little bit of an overview of different jurisdictions. The one ordinance we drafted and is attached as a 0 rating item is kind of a combination between North Glen and Westminster, and that includes the 1,000-foot setback for the schools, parks, playgrounds, daycares, pools, but also includes the 500-foot public trail setback, and then it's applying the North Glen application. So it applies to sexually violent predators, registrants who have felony convictions, registrants that have multiple victims or multiple offenses. This is just kind of a starting off point for our discussion. As Harold kind of pointed out, I'm going to switch to the next slide, which just gives, do we want to pursue something like this? And if so, what are we looking for? We wanted to kind of give the most restrictive version of the ordinance that staff is currently investigating. If City Council wants to go more restrictive, we can certainly pursue that, but we want to start from a more restrictive point and then kind of talk about if we want to scale it down to have lessen setbacks, less applicability, less places we're considering for restrictions, kind of that nature. So it's just meant to be a talking point, kind of get everyone's ideas and directions for staff, and then we'll have a further discussion at either a subsequent 0 reading or for a first reading if we have sufficient direction tonight.
Okay. Taking us some time to think through this. Do we have any questions or comments or a motion from anybody on council? Councilor Christ.
So just to clarify that if this ordinance goes into effect, anything that is existing before this is not affected.
Correct. So kind of thinking to Harold's Venn diagram of operational and policy with this home issue. So the ordinance itself would only be going forward. So any sex offender coming into the city that would be applicable would have to meet the ordinance. Any person renting or letting a space to a sex offender would have to meet the ordinance. If you move, that would also meet the ordinance. And if a school, daycare, one of the protected facilities comes into effect after you're already living there, you would stay in that home until such time that you move. Looking at that Venn diagram, though, we have the operational standpoint where we're still looking into the group home aspects of the home at issue. And then if this ordinance were to come into effect, assuming operationally everything was fine and they're in compliance, the ordinance would not affect that home in particular because of the exemptions and just ensuring that we're not, putting restrictions on individuals that didn't exist the time they started living in a certain location.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Now, the zero reading ordinance that you provided in our packet, it didn't include school bus stops, did it?
It did not. We don't have really sufficient information from this point from our school districts to put those in. If that's something council is interested in, though, we can certainly try to gather that information and put it into an ordinance. We just left it off because we don't have that information right now. So it wasn't easiest for us to put something in there when we don't know what that's going to look like yet.
And would a youth center, would that count as a school or just a place where children congregate? I mean, should we make it more broad where children might congregate?
We can certainly specify additional locations, or we can provide definitions of certain locations. Right now, the rec centers, I believe, is city facility rec centers, schools, any schools other than a home school. And then we really don't have a youth center per se, apart from like daycare facilities. So I think we have daycare facilities, rec centers. I suppose our children, youth, and family center could be included, as well as a recreation center. I'd probably put in that category. But that's just my thoughts. We can certainly clarify that.
Okay, thank you.
So if I can jump in too, I think one of the pieces, and when we said zero reading, is I think we want to get some answers from council to determine, again, kind of going back, do you want to consider this? Do you want to give us some parameters? Again, this was a starting point in case council wanted to do something, and then we'll work through some of these questions once we dig into it.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, thank you. So to the city manager's point or question, I do want to move forward with some kind of ordinance that puts parameters around sex offenders living, especially around schools. I did like the idea of having an under 18 because there are sex offenders who it's, the crime that they've committed was not against a child. Would that even, to have that restraint, would that really even have an impact for those individuals? So is it really addressing the concern there? But I had a question on the group home piece. In the event that the group home has a group home for sexual offenders, as well as sexual offenders who are substance abuse, would this ordinance, if we move forward with this type of ordinance, would that apply to them?
Mayor Pro Tem, yes, it would going forward.
Going forward.
So if any future recovery home that's protected otherwise in a group under the state law would still have to meet our sex offender distance requirement if we had a distance requirement in effect.
Okay.
So there's not a get out of jail free card.
That's what I wanted to
so
make
say.
sure is if we move forward with something, are they going to try to find a loophole, and what are some ways that we can remedy that before?
So Jeremy, you might want to clarify. So what happens, because I've heard it twice now. So what happens if there is a group home and someone leaves, can someone else come back in?
No, it would still be the act of coming back in as a sex offender would be still criminalized under a distance-based ordinance.
Okay.
So it's not like they have the grandfathered. I hate to say sex offender space put aside.
Yeah.
It's just that the conduct wasn't illegal at the time it happened, so we're not penalizing it, but any future conduct would be penalized.
Okay,
or
okay, I
subject to
see
the
what the
ordinance.
question was. And then, as well, group homes, these aren't long-term spaces. When people come into a group home, they're not living there for several years. Is that a correct assumption?
It could be several years. So looking at the state protected statute, go back a couple slides. So, you know, if it's an intellectual developmental disability home, it's as long as they're providing services and support, it qualifies as a group home. So I can imagine situations in where someone qualifies as intellectually or developmentally disabled individual who's in a home for an extended period of time. Certainly with the age groups as well. So older person's home could be long-term. I believe the behavioral and mental health disorders screen with the state is intended to be more of a short-term. But looking at drug recovery, it all depends. Some individuals take a long time, you know, from my anecdotal legal experience, experience in drug recovery. So it could be multiple years where someone is in a, you know, drug recovery home receiving supports and services.
Okay, and so in regard to sexual offender, what would that rehabilitation piece look like? What would the necessity of being in a group home?
So none of
that
these
time frame.
None of these group homes are specifically targeted towards sexual offenders.
Okay.
So there isn't a group home. There is no, under state law, there isn't a group home specific for sex offenders.
Okay.
Sex offenses.
So
That doesn't
I was
exist.
wondering if there was like some kind of therapy or some kind of group therapy that happened in this kind of living condition. So I guess it's I don't understand why there would be multiple sex offenders living in one group home.
I think it comes down to that, you know, persons who are more likely to commit sex offenses or have a history of sex offense
Yes.
might also have other issues going on. So speaking from past experiences and working for other jurisdictions, I do know that a lot of persons who maybe have mental disorders or intellectual disabilities might also have, you know, a sexual offense history. Or if you have substance abuse, sometimes substance abuse also goes in hands with sex offenses. So I think it's more of like a comorbidity where you
Yes.
have someone who has two different things going on, but only one of them is protected in the group home. So you're looking at a group home for drug and alcohol recovery, you just happen to be a sex offender as well. You're not there
Okay.
because of the sex offense, you're there because of the drug and alcohol recovery.
Okay.
So
Yes.
There's some nuance to this, and Christina's here because Christina's actually certified in this arena, and I think it's important to the point that Jeremy's making. There are, and Christina, jump up and help me on this one. There are group homes for sexual offenders.
Okay.
The nuance in what Jeremy's talking about is that is not one of the protected areas within the state law that was created. That dark circle?
Yes, yeah.
That is the overlap. And when Jeremy gave the example that you're in for drug recovery or alcohol recovery, there could be a co-component to this. And Christina, if council wants that information, can talk through that.
I would like that information, and I think it would be good for the public to hear as well.
Councilmember Mayor Christina Pacheco, Human Services Director for the city. And yes, Jeremy hit the nail on the head. Usually therapy for people who have committed a sex offense happens in a group setting. I suppose that could be within a residential setting. But the treatment phase for somebody that is in therapy can last up to 2.5 years. So it's quite a rigorous treatment program. And usually it can happen within prisons, within jail, post-plea as well. And it just really ranges on level of risk, what that treatment modality looks like. But it is quite an extensive treatment program that individuals have to go through.
Okay. That was all I have. Thank you.
Councillor Popkin.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I just want to say to staff, I appreciate how quickly you're all helping us kind of get up to speed and informed on this challenging policy discussion. I know it kind of cropped up, and appreciate all of the time and effort that has gone into this so far. Question for Zach on the definitions that you were referring to when we were talking about different types of sex crimes. Can you just clarify, and maybe I'm not familiar with this distinction under Colorado state law, but for sexual assault, is that explicitly just for having sexual intercourse with a victim that does not consent, or is it other types of sexual behavior too?
But it has to include penetration.
Got it. Under Colorado law?
Yes.
Thank you. And then another question, probably for you. I'm just curious. So this has come out, if I understand, this has come from concerns about a prospective group home intended to house registered sex offenders in Longmont. Do we have data on, I mean, you mentioned some other elements, but I take it that we do have data on currently registered sex offenders living in Longmont. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, we do.
And do we have data, and if you don't have it with you today, that's totally fine, but maybe at a future discussion we could understand more, like, kind of rates of concern or issues in terms of recidivism or other arrest activity or other, I mean, to the extent we can track compliance with state law, just to understand to what degree this is, or how serious of a problem this is, and that might inform kind of the extent of our policymaking considerations.
Sure. Let me give you some information, council member, and maybe this will help answer some of your questions. So when we look at stats in Longmont, there are 286 offenders within the city of Longmont that we have registered. 5 of those are considered SVPs when we did some research. Out of the 286, 202 of those are what we consider web eligible offenders, which means they are entered onto the CBI database, which means they're either felony level or repeat offenders. So 181 out of the 286 offenders have felony offenses and have fixed residence, meaning that we do have a population here that is considered unhoused, that is also registered. But when we talk about 181 of those actually have a fixed residence. Out of those, 105 of the 286 have misdemeanor sexual offense charges. And then 18 out of the 181 offenders that have fixed residencies, 18 of them have multiple offenses or reoffenders. So it's about 6.2%, if I'm correct with the information. Okay, I just want to double check. When you talk about repeat offenders, I did pull information that we had internally for the last 6 months. So we do have several locations across the city of Longmont that do have multiple offenders living together already. When I pull that, our calls for service are relatively low, other than the fact is that we do regular sex offender registry checkups, meaning officers go out and verify that they're still at the address and those types of things. When you do look at it, most of the calls for service are related to that. We do have calls for service from police, it's very minor, and then we do have some minor calls for both fire and EMS at the various locations. Now, we did not pull what we consider apartment complexes. The numbers I'm giving you or the data that I'm giving you is only from residents. We do have several apartment complexes that do have multiple sex offenders that reside within them. That would take a lot longer for staff to pull based on the apartment complex and separate all the calls for service. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of answers to what you were asking, but that is basically the data that we have. Now, if you're asking about each individual offender and kind of what they've done in their history or criminal history, that would take a lot of manpower and time to try to determine all of those pieces.
No, I think what you provided was very much sufficient there. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on what, like, the checkups or the check-ins that you mentioned mean? Like, what does that really entail? Because I think that's helpful for us to contextualize, like, how proactive the Department of Public Safety already is.
Yeah, we are. We get a list and we go out, and then the officers will go out and just do random checks to ensure folks are in compliance, being where they say they are registered, and those types of things. Most of them don't have a lot of extra things added on, and it's just simply making sure and verifying that they're where they're supposed to be and residing where they're supposed to be.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
question maybe for Jeremy or Harold here. I'm curious, are there like group living licenses that exist in the state of Colorado? Are there licenses for these types of group homes or for multi-resident registered sex offender home properties? I'm just curious, like what kinds of structures already exist in the state or in Longmont or the county?
Interesting question. So we don't have a license structure that within our process. In terms of the categories that we mentioned that are allowed via state law, there are groups that do license register those facilities for drug and alcohol rehabilitation. I think the name of the group in that CAR is a group that does that registration process. But Christina, is there so no, there's not statewide a specific registration or licensing for homes related to sexual offense.
Got it. And you were, just to make sure I heard you correctly, there are licenses for group homes for like substance abuse recovery?
It's a registration process that they go through the state office for mental and behavioral health.
Yeah.
And they I think they contract with a group that the acronym is CAR. I don't know what that means, that actually does that for these categories that we're talking about here. Is that correct, Jeremy?
Yeah, I believe it's the Colorado Agency for Recovery Residents. I think it's primarily focused on that last category, so alcohol and substance abuse recovery. So looking at the other categories, I can't speak to intellectual and developmental disability specifically. I assume there is some sort of state licensure requirement. Same with the age group. And I'm certain there is one from the state for behavioral mental health disorders. That's a higher level of care in that kind of group home setting. So I'm certain there is some sort of licensure from the state, but there isn't a local licensure requirement for any of these group homes. Where it comes in from an operational standpoint is when they're, modifying the residence to fit the group home structure.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're modifying your existing footprint of your house, I guess it's the internal footprint, so changing the bedroom layout, that's what triggers other code requirements. So, if it's enough to qualify as congregate living, you have to have automatic sprinklers. And so that's kind of the operational standpoint we're talking about from the group home perspective.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. I guess if I could ask staff to maybe over the course of the next few weeks look into whether that some type of license structure. I mean, I'm thinking back to the hotel licenses that we just approved a few weeks ago. From a compliance standpoint, it wasn't intended to be punitive. It wasn't intended to add additional fees per se, or be extractive there. If we could look to see if that is an option, and if that would be an enhancement to our current approaches, I'd appreciate that, just so we know what our options are. I support the direction that my fellow council members are trying to look at here to try to figure out kind of what's the appropriate rule and regulation or rules and regulations here for registered sex offenders living here. But I really do want to make sure that in doing so, we're not creating unintended consequences. For instance, concentrating registered sex offenders in certain neighborhoods as a result of overly restrictive areas that basically, we're a compact city in terms of how we're built. We're not that large from a square footage standpoint. So and we have invested a lot in parks and trails. And so the more we restrict, the more we create pockets. And I want to make sure that we're sensitive to all neighborhoods here in our community. And I certainly don't want to complicate efforts for other types of group home recovery services either in kind of whatever code structures or rules we create. So thank you.
Councillor Crest.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. So first of all, I just want to talk about a little bit group homes. Full disclosure, I work for the state of Colorado. And so I do know that within the last year-ish, it was, I believe, voted on, or it took place before this, but in the last years, group homes have been taken out of the purview of Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And there's a new licensure which surrounded specifically around behavioral health. It's a completely new licensure that's gone into effect as of the beginning of 2024. So yes, there is a licensure process. It used to be with CDPHE, now it's with behavioral health. With that said, Councilmember Popkin addressed a lot of issues that I have myself with moving forward. One thing that I'd like to say is that, just piggybacking off of the very last few comments that Councilmember Popkin made about creating pockets, right? And so when we looked at, I think, the various ordinances from the other communities, I always like to be a little bit more surgical and not just swinging an axe at a problem. I'd rather use a scalpel. In that case, I found that Greeley's application, to me, kind of fit my parameters, which was the under 18. Because generally speaking, when we're talking about distance restrictions, they're almost all specific to youth. Generally speaking, they're almost all specific to youth. Schools, daycares, parks, playgrounds, things like that. And so I feel that really hones in on that issue very well. When it goes to the actual restriction, that's where I feel that we need some more time, because one thing that was not provided for in this this presentation was a map overlay, which council has seen various iterations of. And I think that, I know that staff would prefer that we come up with distances and then we get to see the overlay. I'd rather see overlays under various options. So then I could really see the effect of compartmentalizing, or as I called them, enclaves. Some called them pockets, I called them enclaves. And if we are obviously seeing problems with our constituents finding out about homes that are coming into existence or already been in existence in their various neighborhoods, I can only imagine how residents would feel if they suddenly found out that now their neighborhood is one of the only 3 or 4 allowed to have such residences. And so that's an unintended consequence, I think, that we really need to have a serious conversation about. And so the overlay maps are very important to me when it comes to determining what restrictions from a distance perspective look like. And so that's where I would say that my preferred direction would come from, is that's where the application to me seems appropriate. And then when the restriction for distance comes, I'm going to need some more information as we move forward in this process. I am not averse to moving forward, though, with an ordinance that speaks to restrictions. So, thank you.
Okay, my turn. I don't know if this is true, and it might be a judicial question, but when someone is released from prison, either on parole or they've done their time, and are they released with restrictions themselves?
The only piece I can add on this, and this probably is more of a Christina or Zach response, but this office, Sex Offender Management Board of the state of Colorado does have a restriction on all registered sex offenders not to have contact with children.
Okay.
And that applies post-release. So even without these distance requirements, except at the state level, there is still a no contact with children. And I believe from talking with Christina that it even applies to like your own children in some circumstances. And we'll let Christina answer with more detail than I can provide.
Correct. There is a process that offenders have to go through. There is a restriction to be around any children, and then there is a process that they need to go through to be able to even visit with their own children, even if the offense wasn't committed toward the children.
Is that in perpetuity with that person, or is there a time limit?
It's what I have experienced is that it is during treatment and while the individual is on probation or parole.
Okay. And the reason I asked is because in our conversation we said even if we put in restrictions, it would not appear, it would only be going forward. And so I just wanted the residents to know that the people in that home probably have restrictions already on them for what we're trying to do. Am I correct in saying that, Chief Artis?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to clarify because I want to make sure we're all on the same page. If an individual is released either on probation or parole, the courts can put certain restrictions on that individual where they can live, who they can live with, what they can do, what contacts they can and can't have. It's only during that probation and parole period that those rules apply. Once that individual completes their sentence, meaning time in jail and parole or probation, they're then released back to the public, and there are no restrictions
Okay.
for that individual other than what's required by the state, which is to register with your local agency. So what you're referring to, Mayor, is only at a time and a moment when an individual is either on probation or parole after being released from jail until they complete the end of their sentence, whatever that may be.
But the registration is for life.
Yes, ma'am, it can be, correct.
It can be,
Yes,
okay.
there are options and abilities that once you become a sex offender, it would confuse you if we went into it.
No, I don't.
But you can petition courts to be taken off of it. But for all intents and purposes, unless you petition the court, you are required to register for pretty much the rest of your life.
Okay, thank you. So we are now at a place where we need to decide, are we going to give direction as to whether we want to go forward with a recommendation or for an ordinance, or do we want to get more information? And I'm going to open that up as well.
We're going to have to work through some details.
You gave yours. So Councilor Rodriguez wants more information on, did you?
Distance restrictions.
Yeah,
So, Mayor, if I may
Please, yes.
engage real quick. I think in order to give maps that let you see options on the distance restrictions, if you can go back to the next slide, there's a few components that will adjust that.
Okay.
So if you look at the second column, application, in terms of you see some with sexually violent predators, felons, multiple victims offenses. You know, if you look at North Glen and Greeley, you know, I think the only difference in that is one is where it's 18 and older, the other is for all of them. That's going to be important to understand because that's going to set the points that you would then measure distance from to a certain extent. Or no, actually, that's a piece that's going to come into play. The other piece is when you look at the restrictions and you talk about schools, parks, playgrounds, daycares, and those things, that's going to be important to know where you want us to start because that's going to be the point that we then start building different models with distance. Because if you just, let's say you took North Glens, which is parks, playground, daycare, rec pool, school bus stops. If we then went and said, oh, we want to add public trails, that's going to change the configuration of the map.
Correct.
And so I think if we can get a sense, at least on restrictions in the locations, it's a place for us to start building maps so that you can see the differences.
Is it going to make a difference when you build those maps as to the different degrees of offense that multiple people are living in one house?
The more I'm thinking about this, it's actually that last column that's probably the most important because that's going to be the anchor points where you start measuring distance. But if you want to give us some direction on the application, that helps in the structure of the ordinance. But, you know, parks, playgrounds, daycares, rec pools, that's going to be important in terms of providing maps. Or you could say, give us a map that looks like North Glen and give us a map that looks like Westminster and then give us some different distance requirements. It's
Okay.
at least a place for us to start.
Okay. I would say I like the Greeley one for the reasons that Councilor Rodriguez mentioned. But I also like Westminster as far as the distance goes. I'm not crazy about public trails. They're all over the place. Are we going to disallow people from walking and riding a bike, or if that's part of their recovery? I don't know, but that's my feeling is that. So those are my suggestions. Anyone else? Councillor Popkin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Peck. I actually have a clarifying question here based on what you were suggesting. This is a restriction, if I'm understanding correctly, this is a restriction on residence, not use of facility, correct? Correct. So you could be restricted from living within 1,000, per like the Westminster ordinance here, just to tease this out. Like, you could be restricted from living within 1,000 feet of a park, but that doesn't mean you can't use the park, correct? Right, so there's a question of restriction of residency that really all of these jurisdictions think about in terms of immediate proximity, but not restriction on use of facility.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification. Councillor Yarbrough.
Thank you, Mayor. Just my 2 cents. I agree with the Greeley one. I like that one the best. Not that I like any of them, to be honest. I hate that we have to have this conversation. Because at the same time, when people serve their time, they serve their time. And I mean, we hope the best for people, not to say that they are their best selves. And so that's why we have to put this ordinance together, because to protect our kids and so in our city. But I do just want to make sure that we do give people, we hope the best for people and give them the benefit of the doubt. So when people come out, hopefully they have had treatment and everything. So I myself go with the Greeley one, and like what you said, Mayor, at first I was like, I didn't agree with the distance from the public trails. So I would say that the Greeley one will be the best until we have the map to, and I know that you all are saying you need a distance, so you can give us a map, right? No?
We can give you different options
Okay.
in terms of distance.
Okay.
It's really kind of, if you ignore the distance in this and you said, yes, we're interested in school daycare, school bus stops, parks, and swimming pools, then we can give you a series of maps with different distances to answer the questions that specifically Councilmember Rodriguez and Popkin raised in terms of what's the unintended consequence.
Okay. Councillor Rodriguez.
So just jumping back in, because I know I didn't weigh in on this specifically, but based on direction from the city manager, for clarification purposes, because I'm worried about creating very specific pockets or enclaves, I would and also to note Councilmember Popkins' comments about residence proximity versus the ability to use parks and trails and such. I would like to keep residency restriction to specifically schools, daycares, and parks / playgrounds. I'm more worried about playgrounds than parks in general. When it comes to, I know in the ordinance, just for clarification for some folks, that pools specifically meant pools that are under the jurisdiction of the city of Longmont, not just, say an apartment complex has a pool. And I agree with the statements that may have not been made tonight, but have been made previously in discussions where city facilities are monitored. And so I have less worry about, again, use is not the point, it's residential proximity. And so that's why I would like to keep it fairly narrow in that sense. And so that's my preference when it comes to direction, is to keep it narrow to parks / playgrounds, schools, and daycares. And if we do eventually get some sort of information on bus stops, that's one thing. But, things that are specifically sensitive to youth or children is my preference when we're talking about restriction, because at the end of the day, I believe it wasn't, again, necessarily mentioned here, there was a white paper that has been brought up previously about sex offenders, where they don't necessarily offend where they sleep. So residential restrictions are not necessarily the end-all be-all of protections for the public. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear, I had mentioned, I'd asked about the feasibility of being able to do something where we could have the restriction where the victims were under the age of 18. So I would like to add that component under the application, very similar to what we see for Greeley. The other, in looking at the ordinance, the draft ordinance that was written up for us, so it said 1,000 feet of any school, park, recreation center, swimming pool, childcare center. I would really like to focus on the school, as Councilmember Rodriguez said, park, playground, and childcare center. 500 feet, you know, just, I don't think that that's, I think the 1,000 feet for the school, park, playground area is what I think would be, would make sense. And so that's, and then also too, looking at what a map overlay would look like with those restrictions in place. Also to St. Vrain school buses, they're not designated stops. In some cases, you know, we have a child that gets picked up right across the street from our house, and they're open enrolled somewhere else. So, you know, depending if the child has a disability and they can go, and a school has a certain program, their bus stop is essentially in the neighborhood. So it's not, it would be very hard to pinpoint where these bus stops are. They're all over the place.
So, I want to remove, no, I'm sorry, I want to add in Longmont our Family Youth Center. Councilor Popkin.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Peck. I think that's a good addition. I think to Councilmember Rodriguez's point, I just wanted to add like two small comments here of like different ways to look at this. So building on kind of his comments and the Mayor Pro Tem's, I would love to see an overlay map with all of those elements, the school, childcare, youth family center, as the mayor added, and daycares, plus the parks. I'd also love to see one without the parks. We have a lot of parks in the city, and I would hate for that to be an unintended consequence of forcing those pockets or enclaves. So I'd love to see one with and without, so we understand our options there. And I guess just to make sure I'm understanding, the 1,500 and 300 feet here, those are entirely arbitrary numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no science, data, or other thing that is informing those numbers, correct?
To my knowledge, there's arbitrary numbers, and as Councilor Rodriguez did point out, the State Office of Sex Offender Management Board did find that distance requirements have no impact on recidivism. So it's some
So it could be entirely meaningless, potentially.
It's potentially entirely meaningless.
Okay.
That's just one study, though. You
Yeah.
know, there's different opinions, and certainly we've seen an increase in jurisdictions adopting such measures. I know North Glen was within the past, I believe it was in 2023. Firestone was in the past this year. I think Lafayette passed one in 2020, so we're looking the last 5 years, a lot of jurisdictions adopting distance requirements.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's very helpful. So I guess when we're thinking about these overlays and the different types of things, I think you have the different restriction facilities that I've heard from my fellow council members, and I'd just like to say I would love to see a map with like 1,000, 750, and 500, just to like really understand the different degrees of what that means for the rest of the city too. So I'd appreciate that when we're looking at that. Hopefully it's a pretty easy GIS configuration.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Is you all thus far have given us a decent list that we can toggle pieces in and out, and then I was actually thinking 1,750 and 500, based on what we have, just to give you some different views.
Okay. I think that's it. Do you have the direction that you need, or is there anything more that? Grant's good. What? Okay.
I just want to paraphrase. So council did give us direction to continue looking at an ordinance. You've given us a list of areas that you want us to start from. You want us to look at different distance requirements and potentially pulling parks out to give you all a different view of what that means. And then we'll bring that back to council for conversation for further development of the ordinance. And so I'm anticipating it's probably going to have another 0 reading as we, not even a 0 reading. I think we'll just come back with the distance requirements, get direction from council, and then we'll move forward to first reading.
Okay. And just to reiterate, what operations is going to do is to make sure these homes are safety as far as code goes. And
correct.
Fire
And
suppression, et cetera, which could or could not make it a viable living place.
correct. And I want to reiterate, when we didn't know this came in, but once we know something comes in, once we know that there are other places in similar situations, I say this often, we can't unsee or unhear.
Right.
And so our job is to enforce the code that we have. And so what I can say is they're already engaged in that process.
And per our code, it is okay to have more than 5 unrelated people living in a residence.
Not per our code. I mean,
per
when,
an ordinance.
no,
Oh,
per
no.
state law. So state
I'm
law
sorry.
removed the residency piece,
I thought we did
which,
No.
you know, this is something that's really created a different issue for us.
Yep.
So take this conversation. Congregate living is something that when you look at the building code and you look at the fire code and you look at some of the changes that are coming in, there are other things that this has keyed us in on that we're going to have to look and get prepared for, because these state law changes have created different issues for us beyond this conversation.
Okay. Is there anything else? Councilor Christ.
I just want to include the Family and Youth Center, which the mayor mentioned, but I didn't hear the city manager reiterate to us. And then I agree, I don't think we need the bus stops.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much for all the work you've done in a very short time. And we look forward to you coming back. We are now on the final call, public invited to be heard. Where are they? Oh. Sorry, folks, one more. Legislative bills, these are pretty fast.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll make it quick. Sandy Cedar, Assistant City Manager, here with your legislative update for the week. Today, we are talking about House Bill 05-1147 concerning measures that ensure municipal court defendants are subject to similar conditions as state court defendants. So similar to the bill from last week where the state is trying to align municipal elections with state elections, this is the same kind of thing around municipal courts and state courts. And so obviously that creates a lack of discretion from our municipal courts. And there's lots of things that just don't align the same way when you're talking about the kinds of offenses that we're dealing with in municipal court versus state court. So it may sound appropriate, like, oh, let's just make it all the same, but it creates really an unfunded mandate, conflicts with home rule authority, and violates the Supreme Court Chief Justice Directive, which I had to look up, which currently limits live streaming requirements for criminal proceedings, like evidentiary hearings. There's a concern, certainly from our judge, that this would put victims at more exposure having more live streamed types of court proceedings. Anyway, for those reasons, he really felt strongly that this was not a good bill for the court, and so I'm bringing it to council for an opposed position.
I do not like unfunded mandates on anything. Councilor McCoy, let's see, where are you?
Oh, you just undid mine. I had mine in there.
Well,
I agree with you, Mayor. I don't like unfunded mandates either. And I was going to just support our opposition to this unless somebody had comments to make. Okay, so I'd make a motion, and or what do you want to do?
Let's listen to Mayor Pro Tem first.
Before we move forward with this, I wanted to make a correction. It's HB 25.
Oh, goodness.
1147. I had a really tough time trying to look up this bill because I kept trying to put in 05.
I have been doing this since '05, but it is 25.
25. We're
Sorry,
in year
my
25.
apologies, yes.
Yeah, no worries. and again, you know, it appears that the state is pretty good at creating unfunded mandates, and and it leaves it up to municipalities to, you know, to deal with the consequences. So, you know, I do oppose this moving forward. I did not get a chance to speak to Senator Amable. She was one of the co-sponsors on this, so I really wanted to get the rationale. But even as I was reading through the bill, it looked like there were a lot more, just a lot more negative parts that we would have to deal with as opposed to what good can come out of it. And I understand that, you know, in some communities, Colorado is very diverse, and you have your rural pockets, you have mountain communities, so different municipalities and how they handle, you know, I could see where they're coming from. However, for us, it's not the best measure best avenue we want to take. So yeah, I'll second moving to oppose this particular bill.
So was there a motion made?
He did.
Okay. So the motion to oppose Bill
HB 25,
1147 was made by Councilor McCoy, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Hidalgo Faring. Seeing no one in the queue, let's vote. What happened here? Okay, I'm good. That carries unanimously. Thank you, Sandy. And now, yes. Linda Allure, I see you sitting there waiting patiently.
I feel like I need to hand y'all a puppy or something.
I would love a puppy. And turn on your mic, please.
Upper right-hand corner. There.
Oh.
You did it.
Thanks. Okay. My name is Linda Allure. I'm on the board, nonprofit board for Flight 629 Memorial. And I have presented to you before. For those who don't know, a Flight 629 was the first commercial airplane that was bombed and actually crashed at Highway 66 and County Road 13. We're planning a memorial for the victims and citizen responders. We wanted to keep you advised of the progress. We are planning a fundraiser May 10th at the Meade High School, an Elvis Presley tribute concert. This concert will be family friendly. We would ask that you would all attend if possible and help promote this event. Advertising with details will be sent to you once we complete the flyers. We have hired an artist to help officially begin the design of the memorial and to also design a challenge coin. We are in regular contact with those connected to the land location of the proposed memorial location. So we still have that. Many of your past and current citizens here in Longmont were either a part of the tragedy or remember it. I personally have family and friends who remember this historical event. One of the many things that make Flight 629 special and different is the number of citizens involved in the crash scene. In 1955, there was not a regular fire department system, so hundreds of farmers and regular citizens were at the crash scene. Those were the first to hopefully rescue, but ended up protecting them from looting. Flight 629 resulted in many other significant actions, such as FBI different training, the first TV in a murder case, and also the x-ray of your luggage now. The other guy made you take your shoes off. So we hope if anyone here knows of someone who remembers that or was part of it, to contact us, because we are taking recordings of history recollections of that. We have received financial support from Dacono, Frederick, and Platteville, and are in contact with several other cities, towns regarding their support. We are asking if you would be willing to be a community champion for the Flight 629 Memorial. We hope many will help support this important event as we unify and pursue a vision for a memorial for the long forgotten victims and citizen responders, as well as the official organizations that were involved. We want to really recognize, honor, and remember the concept of how many hundreds of citizens, organizations, and multiple cities. It was Meade, Platteville, Fort Lupton, Longmont, Greeley. So many people came together for this historical event that we want to honor that sense of community and support, and also recognize that it had some effect on laws. So I just wanted to ask for your support.
Thank you so much. And
Thanks.
thank you for working on this.
Yes, we're progressing.
It's important.
Yes.
And Becky Tassone.
Hello, I felt like I should bring you guys a cup of decaf or something to keep you going. Okay, where do I push up here on the right?
You've got it on already.
Okay. My name is Becky Tassone, Vice President of Flight 629. I'm a native of Colorado from Greeley. My relationship with Longmont was always through relatives that lived here. As I researched, I started reading on what you loved, Mayor, and we have a common love of historic preservation. My heart is excited to meet you guys tonight, and just sitting here, it was just an eye-opener as we go from one city council to the other. As a citizen of Weld County, it is important for Flight 629 to recognize Longmont. This event of November 1st, 1955 had so much to do with your city and Longmont. It has been noted and written in books. The Imperial Hotel was the place that the city officials mentioned that they had most telephone lines to reach out to all the different entities that were going to help with this tragedy of the plane that exploded over the beet fields in Weld County. They desperately needed your phone lines, but they also needed your first responders. We understand hundreds of citizen responders came out that night. Besides the State Patrol and the other first responders were the firemen of the Longmont Rural Fire Department. One of those firemen was a young man, Conrad Hopp. 40 bodies from that plane landed on his parents' property, which is what she mentioned, the area. Back in the day, the firefighters had to get on the party line and call 5 people who called 5 people to come out and fight the fires. They came with a shovel, a hose, and a bucket. The problem that night is there was no fire hydrants, so no water. We're talking 1955. When they arrived, they realized that there was no survivors, and so they started covering the bodies and guarding the victims. Flight 629 Memorial wants to thank Longmont and recognize their contribution during these hard nights, and of recovering the bodies to the morgue and the plane pieces located 6 miles apart that were transported to the FBI in Denver for the trial. This is the first of 2 challenge coins to thank the work of citizen responders and the first responders in Longmont, and now the city. We hope your city will join in and help us with the first memorial after 70 years at Weld County that they have not had a memorial. There are 44 people that lost their lives, and they're being brought in November of this year. On that note, you represent the past and the present families of this event. I want to present to you, Mayor Peck, a coin from the Denver Police Museum representing unity to each of the 10 cities and 10 mayors we are approaching, with Longmont being the most prevalent. So I have a permission to approach.
Of course.
Yes, so this is the card, but this is from the Denver Police Museum. Oh, my goodness, right there. She'd like to get a picture. We have a Facebook page. Oh, I thought I turned that on. Hey, time's up, we're gonna take.
Great job.
It's a really cool point. We're making our own. Are you trying this? No, I'm not.
This is our logo that Denver Police has used. They're doing their own memorial down at the Stapleton Tower. And so we're doing our own also, that was gonna go to the first responders. So this talks about the 70 years of the 44 lost souls and the tragedy in the sky. And Longmont, this shows the map. So also, History Colorado is doing a
On the 21st of March, they are opening up
Special section.
a year's. Really? Yeah, this is a big thing, because this changed laws. This changed why your luggage is checked. It changed, Linda knows all the laws and everything.
Yeah. But anyway, History Colorado has a special section starting at March 21st.
March till February.
Can you say that in the mic so people that's watching
yeah.
can hear you?
So History Colorado has a special section devoted to Flight 629 starting March 21st through next year, where they have actual airplane parts, some victim things that were there that they had on, but they had they have a special section for this particular. And Denver Police Museum as well. I don't know if they will, but they should.
Send that to you if you like.
Uh-huh.
And also, there's one more thing that just went out of my head because it's so late. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so when we get ours, we'll bring that to you. And
Okay, say cheese.
Oh, the families are coming in. They've done the DNA and all the people, the Denver Police Museum, and they are bringing them in. They're going to celebrate them by taking them to dinner at the Denver Country Club. They're going to do symposiums at History Colorado, and then our land is going to be released to us, we believe, of where we're going to go, and it's an amazing story, and I could probably email you and tell you the secret.
Oh.
So we're excited, yeah, because we have to guard it until it's released. So they're signing the legal papers, and then 2 months after we are getting our land. And it's going to be absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice meeting you. Thank you, guys.
I am going to move on, is that what you're saying? I knew that, Finger. I am going to leave this up here if anybody before you leave want to look at it. It's a
Yes.
gorgeous.
You can purchase them.
Oh, yeah, they're for sale. If you go to the Denver Police Museum.
The Denver Police Museum has them for sale for $30. So you just go to, and, yeah.
Is there anyone else that would like to come up for last call, public invited to be heard?
Of course, right? Gary Hodges, 2148 Stewart Street. On the gas station discussion, Louisville is one of those communities that ban gas stations, which is a completely meaningless gesture on their part, as they're essentially maxed out with respect to growth. So I'm hopeful at one of their upcoming council meetings, maybe this year, they'll ban oil refineries or steel mills also. It will drive up the cost of living. How much, I don't know, but it will be regressive. It'll be a regressive increase for those at the lower end of the pay scale. And they'll pay dearly. They're the ones that pay. We talk a lot in these chambers about cost of living. We seem to be singularly focused on rent and mortgage and housing prices, but living is a lot more than that. It's groceries, it's gas, it's utilities. That's why I'm talking about energy earlier. On the bike priority, the map that Phil showed earlier, or the presentation. So Denver, there was a letter written to Mike Johnson recently. That was pretty big news story. One of the complaints by the restaurateurs is the removal of parking for bike lanes that they claim are hardly used. San Francisco has the same problem. Seattle, big time, is doing this, and our own Louisville, Colorado is doing a lot of this. They have these weird streets in some of their neighborhoods that have a single car lane that's two ways, and with the dash lines, it's quite confusing. I think about 9th Avenue here between Francis and Main Street, where two-lane traffic was removed some years ago for a portion of that for bike lanes. And I'm on that stretch of 9th Avenue quite frequently, and I'm not sure I have ever, since that's been done, seen a bike making use of those lanes. And so I'm thinking, to what end are we pursuing this? It's like, I feel funny arguing against bike lanes, because it's sort of like arguing against kittens and puppies, it seems. But we are a car-centric society. So ridership, we talked about ridership, RTD. What was left off when you're talking about the numbers is what the full capacity is, and it would be interesting to see ratios of that. You know, is it 10%, 25%, 80% full? The most carbon efficient form of transportation is a full bus or a full train, but the worst is sparsely used public transportation. That is the absolute worst offender of CO2 emissions. And so around the city, I see routinely just empty buses driving around, and we talk a lot about this, showed plots, and I don't know. That's what I got. Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Gary. And now it's Steve's turn.
My, what a nice coin.
Don't
Steve,
pocket it.
I wouldn't do that. That's against my religion. Steve Altschuler, 1555 Taylor Drive. Going back to the same presentation, several thoughts came to my mind. You guys might have, obviously, other information that was not presented tonight. My thought was, how much was that going to cost? 50 million, 100 million, 500 million? You know, they said it was like a 25-year project, and yet we did not get to hear any conversation about money whatsoever. I'd also be curious to know how many millions they've already spent just creating the presentation. But I think when they present those things, that'd be valuable information for the public to hear also. So I also wanted to talk about the gas stations. Limiting gas stations, this goes back full circle to where we started this evening. Limiting gas stations will only force more people to buy gas out of town. And when they're out of town, they'll probably spend more money on other things while they're running around in other cities. So economics, supply and demand, and a free market. If there are too many gas stations, some will close. The right of a business person to make their own choice is theirs, not for the city council, as long as it's a product that's allowed to be in this city. Extra competition also lowers prices. So again, this should not be a city council condition. It should be a free market condition. And as long as I have a little time, I'm going to make Sean happy and mention Doge again. Doge publicly announced the end of $9 million in contracts that included a Central American Gender Assessment Consultant Services. A lot of these are going to be DEI, and I'd like to point out that the Supreme Court, DEI is basically affirmative action. The Supreme Court has already ruled that that is unconstitutional. So I'll get to that in a second. $59 million FEMA spent housing illegals, and then when there were all the disasters from Hurricane Helene, they said they had no money. There was $101 million where 29 diversity, equity, and inclusion contracts were canceled. $15 million where their Department of Education DEI training grants were canceled. There was another $45 million where they canceled DEI scholarships in Burma. Why are we spending $45 million for Burma? $784 million canceled contract to build a new embassy in South Sudan. Doge is saving us billions and billions of dollars, whether it's wasted dollars on things we don't need, whether it's graft and corruption, all those things. So I say 3 cheers for Doge, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Wow, how's that for timing?
Anyone else?
My name is Nathan Drashner. I'm a resident on Winding Drive near the facility we discussed earlier. Oh,
No,
did
you're
I start
good.
too quick?
You're good.
Okay. I just wanted to thank you guys. I mean, I think you're being really thoughtful about this, and the time that all the staff put into this, I really appreciate. You know, and your concern about enclaves, I share. You know, it's not fair to say this shouldn't happen anywhere, you know, in the city. The one thing that I didn't hear you guys bring back up, and I know you've got a million things on your desk. I think last time you guys had mentioned something about working with a legislative liaison about potentially this being a bit of a state issue. I do think there's some state roles here, and I just encourage you to remember that, you know, those facilities you know, I mean, we just found out tonight that there is no sort of sex offender facility type thing. And I mean, you guys have a ton of things going on. I know it may not happen in the next couple of weeks, but please keep that in the back of your minds. A lot of the residents that I live near, and myself included, kind of feel like it's a correctional facility of sorts that's just been dropped into our community based on the feedback you heard earlier about, you know, the 3 of the people that are living there have been evicted in the last year. So, you know, anything you can do from that state perspective, we'd really appreciate as well. That's all I have. I'll cede my time, I guess. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'd like to open this up to anyone else in the public that would like to address us. Come on down.
I just want to piggyback on what he said. My name's Doug Thompson. I live at 181 Olympia Avenue. I've sat here calmly and patiently for
A long time.
a long time, like we all have. But and I listened carefully to the proposed ordinance for the sex offender residents, and I believe it includes a grandfather clause, which means it doesn't address the citizen complaint that started all this. So I'm wondering how we can address this issue.
I know that we're not supposed to talk, but to everyone who's interested in that, you can contact your legislators. We don't have to do that. And that would to get laws passed. So you can go on the website and find out who your legislators are and address them.
Any law we pass, it would be unconstitutional if we passed a law.
So we're now at council. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Come on down if you want to speak.
I promise.
No, that's fine.
Okay, I will be very, very fast. My name's Heidi. I live on Winding Road.
Okay.
I'm with the same neighborhood that has this issue. I have 2 daughters. I was driving with them just to provide context. I don't know what the right answer is, but I was driving her to school yesterday. We're driving down, coming out of our driveway. The gentleman who's in the sex offender house, for lack of a better term, there's the one that I know is convicted of crimes against children. He was sitting out there in the backyard, which looks right at us, and we're trying to go to school. What am I supposed to tell my kid? So I just want to provide that as a landscape to consider how this is for other people, not just my family, but there's a lot of families in this neighborhood. And I live between both of the properties that have suddenly sprung up out of nowhere. So I just wanted to provide that context.
I feel for you, really. So now, is there, and there he comes.
I know, yeah. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, there we go. That's. Go ahead. Okay. So, yeah, I don't live in that neighborhood, but I have had people who have had to deal with sex offenders, and I have dealt with them personally, and I understand a lot of the concerns that go into like that the neighbors are having right now. And it's not a good setup. The entire situation that has started this is concerning. The one side, a couple side effects that are kind of in this to begin with are, we don't have a way for someone to make a bad choice or do anything and then for them to like get over it and then to reintegrate back into society, period, the end. And that's for anyone who commits any crime, period, because it will still be on them. We've taught
there was a mention of you could petition the judges to potentially get it removed off your record. I could potentially petition to get my record pardoned right now as just a violent offender, not a sexually violent offender. I can tell you right now that is not happening, period. That judge will never go for that. So it's theoretical, but it's not realistic. So there's no way to like have a way to reintegrate it. And it would be nice, ideally, if there was a way for them to get treatment and they're not constantly having to be monitored or do something. And I'm talking, and this is once again, in general for anyone who commits a crime. So these are things that would go into it. I know these are big, massive issues trying to address the city council. It's also things to understand when going into this issue, and I know it's people dealing with kids and dealing with the concerns of the protection of their family. And one of the biggest things that's going to help families, to help make sure that these people don't get hurt and don't cause problems in the future, is not banning them from shelters, is not banning them off the streets. It's getting education to them. That has proven efficacy, and finding ways to get that is going to be key one way or another. And if we can find ways to do that, that will help keep this community safer. So thank you.
Thank you for that information. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to address us? Seeing no one, I'm going to close final call, public invited to be heard, and we are now at council comments. Mayor Pro Tem.
So I have a couple of things that I heard tonight. So one of them being the grandfather clause. We don't really have the option to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, so if we passed an ordinance, would it be unethical or even a constitutional violation to say, we've passed this law and then now you have to adhere to it even though your situation has already been established?
Mayor and Council, Eugene May, City Attorney, we would advise against that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's, I mean, every single legal advice that we've received, it would be to not violate that. So I think it extends beyond, our choice, and, but I think there's some civil rights and constitutional rights that would be violated there. The other thing that I heard, so I have no problem with, relooking at our system, relooking at budgeting. If there's excess funding or excess spending that's going on, I'm all about fixing that. That's being responsible. However, I do have issue with the person that received $38 billion in government contracts leading the charge to do that. And he also received $6.3 billion in state and federal funds, billion, and an additional 11.4 in regulatory tax credits. So I have an issue with funding being pulled that helps support municipalities for flood mitigation, our RSVP, our Kaufman Street, the RISE grant that we received, all these federal dollars that we pay into that come back to our communities. So I do have a little issue with, putting a stop to some of these fundings that we're able to get back. We've paid into taxes, and if we're able to reclaim those for our communities, to better our communities in roads, infrastructure, and I'm not saying that all government spending is wise, and I have no issue with going and cleaning things up, but I do take issue to the person who's leading the charge, because he is financially benefiting a lot.
With your tax dollars.
And with our tax dollars. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Councilor Popkin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. First of all, I just want to say if no one should have to apologize here if you've waited this long to speak. Our rules allow it, and if you're following our rules, by all means do so. I will say, like, I do support doing so efficiently and respectfully of like the topic that you choose, but like all in all, like that's our rules, that's your prerogative, that's your right. And even if I have to leave for Pittsburgh in 5 hours, I am here and I will listen to you. So the second thing, there was a member of the public who spoke about the dollars attached to the transportation mobility plan. I didn't ask about that during my questioning, and that's because it actually is fairly laid out in there. So I'd encourage you to take a look. There are multiple charts that show kind of the bicycle cost investments that are proposed over different horizons, as well as per different priority. And there are like hundreds of what it would cost in today's dollars, obviously, but that is actually broken down to the transportation department and plan department's credit. So just wanted to note that and thank the members of the public for all their comments today.
I just want to let people know on council that I am leaving in the morning. We'll be back on Saturday, and Mayor Pro Tem is in charge. City manager remarks?
No comments, Mayor, Council.
City attorney?
No comments, Mayor?
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned.
Let's see.